Section 1. The early Homer who he was before we met him. There is a version of Homer Simpson that the show almost never talks about. Not the man stumbling through the door at the end of a long shift, not the man with a donut in each hand watching the television with his mouth open, not the man who has somehow survived being hit by a car enough times that it barely registers as remarkable anymore. There is a version of Homer Simpson who was 6 years old, standing in a kitchen that smelled like whatever Mona Simpson was cooking, and the world had not yet done anything to him. That version of Homer only exists in fragments. The show gives you glimpses, scattered across seasons, tucked into flashback episodes that arrive and disappear without ceremony. But if you gather those fragments and hold them together, something emerges. A picture of a childhood that explains almost everything about the adult Homer became. And the more carefully you look at that picture, the more you realize that Homer Simpson was not always the man we know. He was shaped into that man, slowly and deliberately, by a series of events that he never fully understood and never had the cognitive tools to process. So let us start at the very beginning. Not the beginning of the show, but the beginning of Homer. Homer J. Simpson was born on the 12th of May, 1956. The show is not always consistent about this, because the floating timeline reshapes the past every few years to keep the characters permanently middle-aged, but 1956 is the date that appears most often in the show's earlier seasons, and it is the one that fits the most established backstory details. He was born in Springfield, to Abraham Simpson and Mona Simpson, in a hospital that would later become a parking lot, which is the kind of detail Springfield handles without ever acknowledging how sad it is. Abe Simpson is a complicated figure in Homer's origin story. The show depicts him as cold, distant, often cruel in his criticism, a man who withheld praise from his son with such consistency that it became its own form of communication. There are episodes built around this dynamic, moments where Homer seeks his father's approval and does not receive it, moments where the absence of Abe's affirmation lands on Homer with the weight of something physical. Abe is not a cartoon villain. He is something more mundane and more damaging, a man from a generation that did not know how to express love through words, and so expressed it through silence, and whose son interpreted that silence as evidence of his own inadequacy. But Abe was not Homer's primary parent during Homer's earliest years. Mona was. And Mona Simpson, in the years before Homer turned 6, was present, attentive, and deeply in love with her son in a way that the show communicates without ever spelling it out. You can piece it together from the way adult Homer talks about her in the rare moments when he allows himself to. From the episode Mother Simpson, when Homer finds her at the cemetery and sees her for the first time in decades, and his voice does something that even casual viewers notice. There is a quality in Homer's response to his mother that does not appear anywhere else in his emotional range. It is the quality of someone who was once deeply loved in a way that mattered, and then had that love removed before he was old enough to survive the removal without damage. Mona left when Homer was approximately 6 years old. The details of why are documented elsewhere in the show's mythology, in the episodes that reveal her as a radical activist who was forced underground after destroying a biological weapons facility owned by Mr. Burns, but the mechanics of her departure are almost secondary to its effect. One morning she was there, then she was gone. And Abe told Homer she was dead, and gave him a headstone that belonged to a poet named Walt Whitman as proof. And Homer grew up believing that his mother had died before she ever had a chance to see who he would become. Think about what that does to a 6-year-old. Not what it does in a dramatic, cinematic sense, but what it does quietly, in the background, over years and decades. A child whose mother disappears without explanation searches for the explanation inside themselves. They find inadequacy. They find the assumption that they were the reason. Children who lose parents in this way, whether to death or abandonment, often develop a core belief that sits beneath every other belief they carry through their lives. The belief that they are fundamentally unlovable. That the person who was supposed to love them most, the person whose love was supposed to be unconditional, found a condition they could not meet and left because of it. Homer Simpson carries this belief for his entire life. The show never states it directly, because the show does not state things like this directly. It shows it instead. It shows it in the way Homer clings to Marge with a ferocity that sometimes tips into desperation. It shows it in the way Homer responds to any hint of abandonment with panic disproportionate to the situation. It shows it in the way Homer says "I love you" to his children, with a frequency and sincerity that feels almost out of character for a man the show codes as emotionally obtuse. but which makes complete sense when you understand that Homer Simpson is a man who has been waiting his entire life to prove that he is the kind of person who does not get abandoned. The years between 6 and Homer's high school enrollment are largely undocumented, but what the show has revealed paints a picture of a childhood that was functional on the surface and quietly devastating underneath. Abe worked. Homer largely raised himself, or was raised by the combination of television, the neighborhood, and whatever scraps of fatherly presence Abe could offer between his own difficulties. Springfield in the 1960s, as the show depicts it in its various flashback modes, was a middleweight American town in the middle of a middleweight American era. Not the explosive cultural turbulence of the big cities, not the complete stillness of truly rural places, something in between. A town where life moved at a pace that felt normal until you left and realized that normal had been covering something. Homer was not academically gifted in school. The show has never been subtle about this, but the interesting question is not whether Homer was unintelligent. The interesting question is when he became unintelligent, and whether that was always the trajectory or whether something specific caused it. The Crayon episode from Season 12 provides one answer, and it is one of the most structurally important reveals in the entire run of the show. In that episode, Homer discovers that as a child he had pushed a crayon so far up his nose that it lodged in his brain, penetrating his frontal lobe and physically reducing his cognitive function. When the crayon is removed by a doctor willing to perform the procedure, Homer's IQ shoots up to near genius level. He becomes a different person. He is articulate, perceptive, funny in a dry and devastating way. He reads books and understands them on the first pass. He notices things that had previously been invisible to him. And he is miserable. We will come back to that in detail later, because it deserves its own extended discussion. But for the purposes of Homer's childhood, the crayon establishes something important, that Homer Simpson's intellectual baseline was not always what we have come to know. Before the crayon embedded itself in his brain tissue, Homer had a different potential, a different ceiling. The child running through Springfield in the early 1960s had a brain that was functioning at a level that the adult Homer Simpson never had access to, and the show gives no definitive answer for exactly when the crayon found its final resting place, only that it was during Homer's childhood and that nobody noticed. Nobody noticed. A child walked around with a foreign object physically impaling his frontal lobe, visited doctors in Springfield across his entire childhood and adolescence, had school physicals and presumably basic medical examinations, and not one physician in Springfield identified the crayon or recommended its removal. This is either a catastrophic indictment of Springfield's medical establishment, or it is evidence that the medical establishment in Springfield was looking the other way, possibly at the instruction of the most powerful man in town. These two possibilities are not mutually exclusive. Springfield's healthcare infrastructure, as the show depicts it repeatedly across dozens of episodes, is not independent. It is embedded in the same economic ecosystem that Burns controls, and that ecosystem rewards silence on uncomfortable findings. The young Homer Simpson crayon lodged in his skull, being raised by a cold and distant father in a town with compromised medical oversight, was not positioned for a life of flourishing. He was positioned for a life of getting by. And getting by is almost exactly what the adult Homer has done, for 4 decades, with a consistency that reads less like success and more like the specific kind of survival that does not require understanding what you are surviving. There is one more element of Homer's childhood that deserves attention before we move forward, and it is the element that shows the show at its most quietly heartbreaking. In the Season 7 episode that reveals Mona's survival, there is a moment where Homer and his mother sit together for the first time in decades, and she describes the night she left. She had come into his room. He was asleep. She had stood over his bed and looked at her son sleeping and had kissed him goodbye. And then she had walked out the door and become someone else. A fugitive, a ghost, a name on a headstone that belonged to a poet. Homer does not remember this. He was 6 years old and he was asleep, and the most important moment of his early life happened while he was unconscious, and he carries no memory of it. His entire relationship with maternal love, his entire framework for understanding whether he is lovable or not, is built on a foundation of forgetting. He was loved profoundly. He has no access to that love as a memory. He only has the absence where the love used to be, and the absence told him a story about himself that the presence would have contradicted. That is Homer Simpson's childhood. A boy with unusual potential, a embedded piece of stationery reducing his function, a father who loved him in ways that did not translate, a mother who loved him in ways he could not remember, and a town that was already beginning to do things to its residents that none of them would ever fully understand. He was 11 years old when he met Marge Bouvier, or 14, or 17. The timeline shifts depending on which season's flashbacks you consult. But the meeting happened in Springfield, at some point in Homer's youth, and it was the second most important thing that ever happened to him. The first was Mona's departure. The second was Marge's arrival. And between those two events, between the woman who left and the woman who stayed, Homer's entire emotional architecture was constructed. When Homer and Marge meet in the show's various retellings of their courtship, Homer is already the person he will be. The essential qualities are already present: the enthusiasm, the impulsiveness, the capacity for affection that the show keeps coded as goofiness, but which is actually something closer to openness. Homer Simpson, even in his youth, was a person who leaned toward connection, who wanted to be liked and loved and included, whose social instincts were warm even when his execution was disastrous. These qualities are not random. They are the qualities of a child who was deeply loved in his earliest years and then lost that love before he could understand why. Children like this tend to go one of two ways. They either close off, build walls, become unreachable, or they go the other direction entirely. They become people who reach toward everyone they meet, who need the confirmation of being loved with a frequency that other people find exhausting, who will endure almost anything to avoid being alone because alone is what it felt like when the most important person left. Homer went the second way. He always went the second way. And that tendency, that reaching toward people, that willingness to be vulnerable and foolish in service of connection, is the thing that makes Homer Simpson, for all his catastrophic flaws, genuinely lovable. Not lovable in spite of the reaching, lovable because of it. He is a man who has spent his entire life trying to become someone that the people he loves will not leave. The tragedy is that his methods are often exactly the kind that make people want to leave. And the miracle is that one person stayed anyway, has stayed for 36 years of television and whatever uncounted years exist in Springfield's warped timeline before the cameras found the family on Evergreen Terrace. Marge stayed. And that fact, more than any theory about radiation or comas or the floating timeline, is the thing at the center of the Homer Simpson story. The woman who stayed after the woman who left. The anchor that holds an unmoored man in place against every force that should have sent him drifting. Before we get any deeper into the theories, let us sit with that for a moment. Homer's childhood was not a tragedy in the operatic sense. It was a tragedy in the quieter sense, the sense of potential redirected, of love interrupted, of a boy who needed one thing and received something adjacent to it, but not quite that thing, and who spent the rest of his life filling the gap with donuts and Duff beer and the specific kind of uncomplicated domestic joy that he has never stopped believing is available to him, even when it seems like everything is working against it. That boy is the foundation. Everything else we are about to discuss, every theory, every mystery, every strange loop in the architecture of the show, is built on top of that boy. On the 6-year-old who woke up one morning to find that the world had changed while he slept, Springfield was already becoming what it would be. The power plant was already there, or becoming there, its cooling towers already casting their long shadows over the neighborhoods where Homer would grow up. Burns was already there, or becoming there, ancient and hungry and indifferent to the town he was slowly reshaping to serve his own permanence. Abe was already there, retreating further into his own history with each passing year, becoming the version of himself that Homer would later try to avoid becoming without fully understanding what he was avoiding. And Homer was there at the center of it, young and uncomplicated and deeply loved by a woman who was about to disappear, walking through a town that was doing things to his body and his brain that he would never fully understand, reaching out toward connection with both hands open, the way he has always reached, the way he will always reach. That is where we start. That is who Homer was before we knew him. Everything else is the story of what happened next. Number. Section 2. Homer's brain. The crayon, the IQ, and the man he could have been. There is an episode of The Simpsons from season 12 called HOMR, which stands for nothing in particular and which is, depending on how you read it, either one of the funniest half hours the show ever produced or one of the saddest. Usually it is both simultaneously, which is the specific quality The Simpsons achieves when it is operating at its highest level, when the comedy and the tragedy are not taking turns, but are instead occupying the exact same space at the exact same time. The premise is deceptively simple. Homer discovers that as a child he pushed a crayon so far up his nose during an act of compulsive self-entertainment that it lodged in his frontal lobe. A doctor removes it. Homer's IQ rises dramatically. He becomes, for one episode, the person he might have been. The details of that transformation are worth examining slowly, because they are doing more work than the show's comedic framing suggests. When the crayon comes out and Homer's intelligence reasserts itself, the first thing the show tracks is not his intellectual performance. It is not his academic capability or his professional competence or his newly articulate vocabulary. The first thing the show tracks is what Homer notices, what he sees when the fog lifts and the world comes into focus in a way it has never come into focus before. He notices Marge. Not in the way he always notices Marge, with a bovine warmth that is sincere but not particularly perceptive. He notices her in a new way. He sees her clearly, perhaps for the first time. He understands the sacrifices she has made. He understands the patience required to be the person she has been throughout their marriage. He sees the intelligence she contains and has largely kept to herself in a household that rarely makes room for it. He writes her a letter of several pages, handwritten, articulate, full of observations that reveal the depth of his feeling and the specificity of his attention. Marge reads the letter and she cries. Not because it is sad, because it is the most fully seen she has been in years, possibly in decades. This is the show making a quiet and devastating point. Homer's intelligence did not just make him better at crossword puzzles or more capable of following the plot of complex films, it made him a better husband. It made him capable of loving Marge in the way Marge has always deserved to be loved, with full attention, full perception, full recognition of who she actually is. The intelligence is not separate from the love. The intelligence is what allows the love to be expressed completely. And then Homer has the crayon put back in. He chooses to return to a state of reduced cognition, knowing exactly what he is giving up, having experienced what full intelligence feels like, having seen what his marriage could be at its most complete, and he walks back into the fog anyway. This choice is presented in the episode as somewhat comic, somewhat bittersweet, the kind of choice that generates a knowing laugh from the audience because it is so essentially Homer. Of course he would choose to go back. Of course he would not be able to sustain the difficulty of being smart. Of course the emotional toll was too high. The show frames this as a slightly tragic but inevitable decision made by a man who is too Homer to be anything other than Homer. But there is a darker reading available, and it has been available since the episode aired. Homer does not choose to return to reduced intelligence because he is lazy or because he cannot handle the complexity. Homer chooses to return because being intelligent in Springfield is genuinely, structurally unbearable, in ways that have nothing to do with his personal limitations and everything to do with what Springfield is. When Homer is fully intelligent, he sees the power plant for what it is. He sees Burns for what Burns is. He understands the relationship between his employment and his poverty, between the working conditions he endures and the man who designed those conditions to be exactly what they are. He understands the town he lives in at a level that the rest of the town cannot access. He can trace the architecture of his own exploitation. He can read the blueprint. And the blueprint is horrifying. A smart Homer cannot coexist comfortably with Springfield because Springfield is not designed for smart residents. The show has made this clear across hundreds of episodes without ever articulating it directly. Springfield operates most smoothly when its population remains broadly incurious about the structures that govern their lives. The power plant stays open because the workers do not ask detailed questions about safety violations. Burns stays powerful because the town does not connect the dots between his decisions and their consequences. The police stay ineffective because the population is too distracted by the next immediate crisis to hold them accountable in any sustained way. Homer, with a genius-level IQ, is a threat to this entire ecosystem, and Homer knows it. The smart version of Homer is genuinely frightened by what he can see. He is not frightened because he is personally in danger, though he might be. He is frightened because the picture is too complete and too ugly, and the gap between what he can perceive and what everyone around him can perceive is too wide to bridge in any satisfying way. Lisa already knows this. Lisa has been living in this state her entire life. She is the smartest person in a town that does not reward intelligence, and the show has spent a third of a century cataloging what that costs her. The loneliness, the isolation, the specific despair of seeing clearly in a world that has organized itself around comfortable blindness. When Homer becomes intelligent and his friendship with Lisa deepens as a result, when they can finally have conversations that feel like genuine exchange, rather than Lisa patiently translating herself for an audience that is doing its best, the show is making a point about what Homer's intelligence cost him socially, as much as what its absence costs him intellectually. Homer and Lisa could have had a completely different relationship. They could have been the kind of father and daughter who understand each other in the way that requires no translation. The crayon made that impossible. The crayon built the wall. There is also the question of what the crayon was doing in there for all those years. Not the physical question of how it stayed lodged, though that is its own small horror. The question of causality. What did 30 or 40 years of a crayon in the frontal lobe actually produce, biologically, in the specific brain of a specific person? The show's suggestion is that the crayon suppressed intelligence, and that intelligence, once restored, returned essentially intact. But this is probably too simple. The brain is not a filing cabinet where things can be stored and retrieved cleanly. A foreign object in the frontal lobe for 30 years would not simply suppress intelligence the way a hand can muffle a speaker. It would reshape the neural architecture around its presence. It would create compensatory pathways. It would produce a brain that had adapted to its own impairment in ways that were specific to that impairment. Which is to say, Homer's brain, even after the crayon's removal, was not the brain Homer would have had if the crayon had never been there. It was a brain that had spent decades organizing itself around an obstacle, finding workarounds, routing cognitive traffic through alternate passages, building a kind of functional intelligence out of whatever channels were still available. The Homer that emerged after the crayon's removal was not the Homer who would have existed without the crayon. He was a third thing, a brain that had adapted to damage and then had the damage suddenly removed, leaving all those adaptive pathways intact and now somewhat redundant. The show does not explore this. The show uses the crayon as a clean mechanism for a clean before and after, which is appropriate for a half-hour comedy. But the real neurology of the situation is stranger and more interesting, and it connects to something the show has been gesturing at for decades without fully committing to the gesture. Homer is not simply unintelligent. Homer has a different kind of intelligence, a kind that does not show up on IQ tests or in the ability to follow abstract arguments or in the professional competence the show codes as the standard metric. Homer's intelligence shows up elsewhere, in his emotional perceptiveness during moments of genuine crisis, in his ability to improvise physical solutions to physical problems, in his survival instincts, which have been tested with a frequency and severity that would eliminate any purely chance explanation, in the uncanny way he sometimes arrives at the correct answer through reasoning that is technically wrong but produces a right result, a phenomenon his family has witnessed enough times that it barely surprises them anymore. Homer's IQ may be 55, as the show's creator has stated, but his emotional intelligence, his social attunement in moments of genuine need, his physical adaptability, none of these are captured by a number that was always measuring the wrong thing. The man he could have been without the crayon is an interesting thought experiment. The show gives us a glimpse of that man in the one episode where he exists, and he is remarkable. He is someone Marge looks at with new intensity. He is someone Lisa reaches toward with the relief of someone who has been waiting a long time for the conversation they knew was possible. He is competent and perceptive and capable of the kind of sustained attention that the normal Homer can only approximate. But he is also deeply unhappy in a way that the normal Homer rarely is. The intelligence brings a clarity that is partly wonderful and partly excruciating. The smart Homer cannot switch off, cannot stop seeing, cannot look at the power plant or at Burns or at the financial architecture of his life without the full weight of understanding pressing down on each observation. The normal Homer is not unaware of these things. He experiences them emotionally, as a feeling of frustration or injustice or sadness, without being able to trace them to their sources, which means he can release the feeling without having to face the cause. The feeling moves through him and dissipates, and he eats a donut and sits on the couch, and the world resets. He is not happy in the fullest sense, but he is not corroded by understanding in the way the smart Homer is. There is an argument, not a comfortable one, but a coherent one, that the crayon improved Homer's life in certain ways, not by enhancing his experience of it, by limiting his perception of it, by installing a ceiling below the level of the things that would most hurt him to see clearly. The show itself makes this argument. Somewhat. The episode's emotional logic depends on the audience accepting that Homer's return to reduced cognition is not simply tragic, that there is something genuine in his decision, that the life he is returning to, messy and limited and cognitively foggy as it is, contains real value that the smart Homer's more expansive life does not. The family, the couch, the donuts, the specific texture of Evergreen Terrace on a weekday evening when nothing dramatic is happening and the television is on and the family is just present in the same room, bumping against each other in the way families do when they are comfortable together. Smart Homer can see this beauty, but Smart Homer can also see everything surrounding it. All the systems and corruptions and quiet tragedies that frame the domestic warmth, and the frame makes the picture harder to simply enjoy. Normal Homer just sees the picture. And that, perhaps, is why he is fundamentally a more contented person than his intelligence quotient would suggest. Not because he is unaware of difficulty, because his awareness is bounded in a way that protects the things he most values from the erosion that full understanding might produce. The crayon theory also intersects with the radiation theory in ways that deserve at least a mention before we move on. If Springfield's contaminated environment is doing things to the biology of its residents, the frontal lobe is not the last or least likely target. Radiation exposure has documented neurological effects. Cognitive impairment from chronic low-level radiation exposure is not a fictional construct invented for this show. It is a real phenomenon, with real clinical documentation. Which means the crayon may not be the only thing reducing Homer's cognitive function. It may simply be the most visible one, the most narratable one, the one the show can point to as a discrete object and say, here is the cause, here is the mechanism, here is the explanation. The crayon is a synecdoche for everything the environment of Springfield has been doing to Homer's neurons for his entire life. The show can show you the crayon because you can see a crayon. It cannot show you the invisible accumulation of neurotoxic contamination in a frontal lobe over 4 decades, because that is not something that fits in a comedic half-hour. So it gives you the crayon, and the crayon is true, and it is real within the show's continuity, and it explains something important, but it probably does not explain everything. The man Homer could have been is not simply the man in one season 12 episode with a slightly different vocabulary and a deeper capacity for marital attention. The man Homer could have been, in a world without the crayon and without the environmental contamination and without the systematic institutional indifference to what Springfield does to its residents, is a man we have never seen, not even briefly, not even in the flash-forward episodes that imagine his children's futures, not even in the alternate reality episodes where different choices produce different lives. That man exists in negative space. He is defined by his absence. He is the outline around which the actual Homer was shaped, and he is visible only in the moments when the show lets you feel the weight of what Homer might have been if the systems around him had simply been what they claimed to be. Good schools. Clean water. A father who knew how to say the thing. A mother who did not have to leave. Medical professionals who looked at a child's brain and found the crayon and removed it before it spent 3 decades in there. All of that is not a fantasy. All of it is simply what other people's childhoods contained. Homer's childhood had the negative of each of those things, and the adult Homer is the result of all those negatives accumulated across a childhood that was doing its quiet damage while Homer was just trying to be a kid. He does not resent this. That is perhaps the most characteristic thing about Homer. He does not carry bitterness about what was done to him. He does not understand enough of it to be bitter in a sustained way, and on the occasions when he understands some piece of it, he responds with an emotional reaction that moves through him quickly and then dissolves. He is constitutionally incapable of holding a grievance. Some people would see this as a limitation, a symptom of the cognitive damage, the inability to sustain the kind of critical perspective that would allow him to look at his life and say, "This was done to me, and I want an accounting." Others might see it as grace, as the specific gift of a brain that processes loss and injustice and disappointment and then releases them, not because they are not real, but because holding them would make the donuts taste worse and the couch less comfortable and the television less entertaining. And Homer Simpson has always understood, at some level below articulation, that the things worth protecting are not ideas about fairness or justice, but the specific textures of a life lived with the people you love. He is not the man he could have been. He is the man that Springfield made him, and that man, despite everything, is still there every Sunday night on the couch at 742 Evergreen Terrace, reaching for connection with both hands open, trying his best in the specific way that Homer Simpson tries his best, which is enthusiastically and with almost no strategic planning, and in a manner that will frequently result in property damage. The crayon is still in there, in a box somewhere, put back at Homer's own request. And the man Homer might have been is still in there too, somewhere, in the neural pathways that built themselves around the damage and did what brains do: adapted, compensated, found another way to be. Both of them are Homer. All of this is Homer. The potential and the limitation and the fog and the warmth and the donut and the letter he wrote Marge that made her cry. All of it is the same man. Number. Section 3. Homer and Marge. The love story the show never fully explains. Let us start with what is objectively true, which is that Homer and Marge Simpson should not work. Not as a couple. Not by any conventional logic about compatibility or emotional maturity or shared values or communication styles or any of the other metrics that relationship science has developed over the last few decades to explain why some partnerships hold and others dissolve. Homer is impulsive, financially reckless, often oblivious to the emotional needs of the people around him, prone to obsessive enthusiasms that consume his attention for one episode and then vanish entirely, physically dangerous to himself and his immediate environment, and constitutionally incapable of the kind of sustained, responsible behavior that stable adult partnership typically requires. Marge is patient, emotionally intelligent, deeply values security and stability, has clear moral principles she holds firmly, communicates through a specific vocabulary of worry and warmth and low-level anxiety, and has a capacity for sustained responsibility that has been demonstrated across hundreds of episodes, in which she is the load-bearing wall of a household that would collapse without her. These two people should not be together. By the metrics we use in the real world to evaluate relationships, they are mismatched in ways that should have produced serious problems within the first year of marriage, let alone across the several decades of their relationship that the show depicts. And yet they are the most enduring couple in the history of American television. They have survived things that would end any real marriage: financial ruin, multiple times over, near infidelities on both sides, Homer's addiction to Duff beer, Marge's gambling addiction, revealed in one episode and handled with a seriousness that the show rarely deploys, extended periods of Marge's depression, periods of Homer being genuinely, not comedically, absent from the emotional life of his family, a near divorce. Several near divorces if you count the episodes that almost go there before the reset arrives to pull everything back. They have survived all of this, and they are still on that couch, still reaching for each other in the way they always have, with the specific physical ease of two people who have been in each other's space for so long that they have stopped noticing where one ends and the other begins. How? What actually holds them together? This is not a rhetorical question. The show has answered it, in pieces, scattered across its run, and the answer is more interesting than either the opposites attract shorthand or the they stay together for the kids explanation that casual viewers sometimes reach for. Let us start at the beginning of their relationship, which the show has retold enough times that we have several versions to work with. The most established version places their meeting at Springfield Elementary during Homer's tenure there, which, depending on the timeline, means they were either in their early teens or about to be. In this telling, Homer sees Marge across a crowded school event and is immediately smitten in the complete and uncomplicated way that Homer is smitten by things, with his whole capacity for feeling, undivided, unguarded, slightly overwhelming to witness. Marge does not immediately reciprocate. Marge is characteristically cautious about Homer, and this caution is not irrational. The young Homer is already recognizably Homer, enthusiastic, chaotic, warm in a way that is also somewhat exhausting. The qualities that will define him for the next several decades are already present in miniature form. The question Marge has to answer is whether those qualities are endearing enough to justify the structural uncertainty that comes with them. She answers yes. Eventually. And the yes is not the product of a moment of romantic surrender. It is the product of sustained attention to who Homer actually is beneath the chaos. Marge, more than anyone else in Homer's life, has always had the capacity to see Homer clearly. Not the Homer he presents, which is frequently a comedic disaster, but the Homer underneath, who is fundamentally gentle and fundamentally devoted and fundamentally reaching toward love with that constant open-handed gesture that defines him. This is the foundation of their relationship, and it is rarely discussed directly in the show. Marge sees Homer, sees him in the specific way that being seen is different from being known or being tolerated or being loved as a habit. Marge has always had a clear-eyed perception of who her husband is, including the parts that are difficult and the parts that are limited and the parts that have cost her things she might have had in a different life. And she chose him anyway, keeps choosing him. The choice is not passive or habitual or the result of inertia. The show returns to this again and again, in episodes where Marge is presented with alternatives, with the opportunity for a different life or a different partner or, at minimum, a temporary escape from the weight of being Homer's wife, and she returns. Not because she has nowhere else to go, because she has somewhere she wants to be, and it is on that couch, next to that man, even with everything he is and is not. Why? The show's most honest answer to this question comes not from the romantic episodes or the flashback episodes or the episodes that center the marriage explicitly. It comes from the smaller moments, the moments in between the dramatic arcs, the moments where the show just puts Homer and Marge in the same room and lets them exist together. In those moments, what you observe is something that the big romantic narratives often obscure. Homer and Marge are genuinely fond of each other. Not in the abstract way of people who have been together so long that fondness has replaced passion. In a specific, ongoing, renewable way, Homer makes Marge laugh, not always intentionally, but consistently, repeatedly, across decades. Homer produces in Marge a specific kind of laughter, that is, the laughter of someone who finds another person genuinely delightful rather than merely tolerable. And Marge makes Homer feel safe. This is harder to see because the show does not foreground it, but it is there if you watch for it. Homer Simpson, who spent his childhood losing the person who was supposed to be his safest attachment, has found in Marge exactly what that loss created a hunger for. A person who does not leave, who has been presented with every possible reason to leave and has not left, whose presence is the one constant in a life that has otherwise been characterized by instability and reversal and the kind of rolling chaos that Homer generates with the casual ease of someone who does not realize he is generating it. Marge is Homer's safety, and Homer is Marge's adventure. These are not metaphors. They are the actual structural functions each person serves for the other. Marge's life, without Homer, would be stable and competent, and largely without surprise. She would manage it beautifully, and it would be deeply smaller. Homer's life, without Marge, would be slightly more chaotic than it already is, and also completely adrift, unmoored from the one person whose sustained attention gives him the sense that his life has a coherent shape. The show has explored what each of their lives would look like without the other. Not explicitly, usually, but through the episodes that put pressure on the marriage, that separate them, that threaten the bond. What you observe in those episodes is not two incomplete people who need each other to function. It is two complete people who are diminished without each other. There is a difference. The former is codependence. The latter is partnership. Now, let us address the difficult parts. Because the Homer and Marge story is not only the story of sustainable love, it is also the story of sustained compromise. And some of what Marge has compromised is worth looking at without the frame of romantic comedy softening the edges. Marge was, in various possible versions of her life, an artist. The show has returned to this thread multiple times, most significantly in the episodes where Marge's dormant creative talent emerges and briefly transforms her relationship with her own identity. She is a skilled painter. She has a genuinely distinctive aesthetic sensibility that the show communicates through the quality of what she produces when she produces it. In a different version of her life, Marge might have been someone defined by creative work, by the exercise of genuine artistic talent in a sustained professional context. She is, instead, defined by the domestic, by the management of a household that requires constant management, by the emotional labor of keeping 5 people functional in close proximity, which, in the Simpson household, is closer to 6 or 7 people, because Homer frequently requires the kind of emotional management that most spouses would allocate to a child. The show is aware of this. It is not naive about what Marge gave up, what she continues to give up, but it also does not position that giving up as purely a loss. Marge's investment in her family is not presented as the tragic burial of her potential. It is presented as a choice that she makes with full awareness, again and again, and that produces something she genuinely values, the specific texture of this particular family's life. Messy and loud and frequently ridiculous, and made of the specific people it is made of, who she loves not despite who they are but because of it. There is also the question of what Marge gets from Homer that she would not get from a more conventionally suitable partner. And the answer the show keeps returning to, quietly, without announcing itself, is honesty. Homer Simpson has no capacity for sustained pretense. He cannot present a curated version of himself because he is not strategically self-aware enough to construct one. What you see with Homer is always what is actually there. His feelings are on the surface. His enthusiasms are genuine. His affections are unperformed. Marge grew up in a household with a father who was emotionally distant and a mother whose way of expressing love was through managed anxiety. She has spent her life in a family emotional landscape that was navigated through subtext and indirection, and the kind of communication that requires you to infer what people actually mean from what they actually say. Homer is the opposite of all of this. Homer says what he means, feels what he feels, and expresses it with a directness that the show codes as comedy but which is, for Marge, something more like relief. He is not performing love for her. He is just in love with her, constantly, with the specific devotion of a man who genuinely cannot imagine a life in which she is not the central figure, and she knows this. Has always known this. It is perhaps the most stabilizing knowledge she possesses. The theories that circulate around Homer and Marge's relationship tend to focus on stress points, on the episodes where the marriage nearly breaks, on what it says about their compatibility that they generate so many near breaks and so many recoveries. The coma theory reads their relationship as a fever dream version of Homer's deepest desires, the perfect partner preserved in amber by an unconscious mind. The radiation theory occasionally gets applied here to explain why Marge's standards seem higher than her circumstances, why a woman of her intelligence and capability stays in a situation that other people might exit. The cognitive impairment hypothesis, the idea that everyone in Springfield is making choices that are subtly warped by what the power plant has done to their brains. But the most coherent explanation for Homer and Marge is the simplest one. They are two people who found each other before they had enough experience to know they were not supposed to work, and who built something real enough and solid enough in those early years that when the experience arrived and the not supposed to work became visible, they had already created something they did not want to lose. They built the house before the storm arrived, and the storm has been trying to knock it down for 3 decades. And the house is still standing, not because it was built to code, because it was built by people who meant it. That is the Homer and Marge story, not the story of a perfect match. The story of a specific kind of love that holds because it is built on something true. She sees him, he reaches toward her, and neither of them has ever been willing to let go first. The show will end someday, or maybe it will not end, given the floating timeline. But as long as it runs, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8 and Maggie is 1, Homer and Marge will be on that couch, exactly where they have always been, choosing each other again without making a production of the choosing. The way people do who have been doing it long enough that the choice has become muscle memory. That is not a small thing. In Springfield, where nothing changes because everything was broken before it could be fixed, the fact that this particular marriage holds is something close to miraculous. And like most miracles in Springfield, nobody remarks on it, because nobody has the cognitive or emotional bandwidth to notice the miracle hiding inside the routine. But it is there. It has always been there. Number Section 4. Homer's jobs, 188 careers, and what they actually reveal. Homer Simpson has held, across the run of The Simpsons, somewhere between 188 and 200 different jobs, depending on how generously you define the term job and how closely you are tracking the episodes. This number is often cited as evidence of the show's anything-goes approach to continuity, the comic convenience of allowing a character to reinvent himself professionally every few weeks without the narrative cost of explaining what happened to the previous career. But if you actually look at the jobs, not as a list but as a pattern, something interesting emerges. Homer's professional life is not random. It is not the product of writers reaching into a hat. It follows a logic, a kind of narrative arc across the years that says something specific about who Homer is and how he relates to the possibility of a different life. Let us start with the baseline. Homer's primary and enduring employment is as a safety inspector at the Springfield nuclear power plant, specifically in Sector 7G. He has held this position since the beginning of the show's run. He has been fired from it and rehired multiple times. He has quit and returned. He has been temporarily reassigned within the plant and temporarily replaced by external candidates. But 7G is always there waiting for him, and he always ends up back behind the console with the coffee and the donuts and the warning lights that he has learned to ignore. The way you learn to ignore a sound in your apartment that has been there long enough to become part of the ambient texture of your life. The plant is his default, his home base. And there is something worth examining in the nature of that home base, in what it means that Homer's professional anchor is a job that, by any reasonable metric, is the most dangerous and consequential position a person with Homer's cognitive profile could occupy. Homer has an IQ of 55. He routinely sleeps at his workstation. He has, on multiple documented occasions, introduced foreign objects into the reactor core to see what would happen. He misses readings. He ignores alarms. He eats through emergencies. He is, by the show's own accounting, spectacularly unsuited for the role of nuclear safety inspector, and the fact that the plant continues to operate without a Chernobyl-level event is either a testament to some unseen redundancy in the facility's safety systems or evidence that whatever the plant is doing to Springfield is being managed by someone who has decided the plant's output is more important than its safety, and that Homer's specific incompetence is more useful than any competence he might theoretically be replaced by. We have discussed the Burns-Homer conspiracy elsewhere in the broader Springfield mythology, the idea that Homer's employment is not accidental, that Burns specifically retained an incompetent safety inspector because competence would threaten the plant's continued operation under its current conditions. That theory is well supported by canonical evidence and worth accepting, at least provisionally, as the explanation for why Homer's position endures despite every rational argument against it. But what about everything else? What about the 188 other careers? The jobs fall into several broad categories when you sort them, and the categories are revealing. The first category is what you might call the aspiration jobs. These are the positions Homer takes not because they are available, but because he wants them, because something in him has lit up at the possibility of doing this particular thing for a living. Being an astronaut, becoming a professional food critic, running for sanitation commissioner, starting his own business. These are the jobs that arrive because an opportunity presented itself and Homer, characteristically, flung himself at it with the enthusiasm of someone who has not yet calculated the risk. The aspiration jobs reveal something about Homer's inner life that the nuclear plant does not. He has genuine interests, genuine passions, genuine areas of enthusiasm that are not purely reactive to circumstance. Homer is curious about the world. He finds things interesting. He has the capacity for deep engagement with subjects that capture his attention, and that engagement is real and meaningful, even if his expertise is always somewhat provisional, and his commitment is always somewhat contingent on the entertainment value of the next episode. When Homer becomes a food critic, he is not simply taking a job. He is discovering a vocabulary for something he has always experienced: the relationship between pleasure and attention. Homer has always paid close attention to food. The show codes this as gluttony, and there is an element of that, but it is also something more specific. Homer experiences sensory pleasure with a completeness that most people do not. He is fully present when he is eating something he loves. The food criticism arc lets him turn that full presence into something that has professional value, and he is briefly, genuinely excellent at it, in the specific way Homer is briefly excellent at anything that aligns with his actual capabilities. When Homer goes to space, it is the aspiration job taken to its logical extreme. Homer Simpson does not belong in space. There is no version of any space program in any country on Earth that would put Homer Simpson in a spacecraft. And yet he goes, and he is competent enough in the specific ways the mission requires, and he comes home, and the show does not treat this as a dream or a hallucination. It treats it as something that happened, because in Springfield the aspiration job sometimes actually works. The second category is the authority jobs. Sheriff, leader of a vigilante group, head of a secret society, mayor of Springfield's smaller neighbor. These are jobs that place Homer in a position of control over other people, and Homer's relationship with authority, both as its subject and as its source, is one of the more interesting subtexts the show runs through its background without foregrounding. Homer does not naturally resist authority. This is somewhat counterintuitive given his surface presentation, but it is true. Homer is not an anti-authoritarian figure. He does not chafe against systems. He does not organize. He does not persist in sustained opposition to the structures that shape his life. He grumbles, he complains, he pulls off the occasional spectacular act of defiant stupidity. But when the dust settles, he returns to the structure. He shows up at the plant. He follows the rules, mostly. He is, at base, a compliant person, which is part of what makes him so useful to Burns and to the broader system that Springfield runs on. But put Homer in a position of authority and something interesting happens. Homer is actually a fairly decent leader in the specific context where leadership requires enthusiasm, flexibility, and the willingness to make a decision based on feeling rather than analysis. The moments where Homer leads well are the moments where those qualities are what the situation calls for. He is not a strategic thinker, he is not a long-term planner, but he is present, he is motivated, and he has an instinct for the emotional temperature of a room that his low IQ score does not reflect, and that his leadership style, unconventional as it is, frequently benefits from. The authority jobs also reveal something about what Homer wants from the world. He does not want power in the Burns sense, the desire for control as an end in itself, the need to dominate. What Homer wants from authority is recognition. The authority jobs are Homer's most direct response to a lifetime of being overlooked, of being the person nobody notices or remembers or takes seriously. When Homer is in charge, he is inescapably visible. And visibility, for a man raised by a father who withheld recognition and whose professional identity has been shaped by working for a man who cannot remember his name, is not a small thing. Homer's need to be seen as one of the most consistent threads in his professional life. It runs through the aspiration jobs and the authority jobs, and through a third category that deserves its own examination: the crisis jobs. The crisis jobs are the positions Homer takes when something has gone wrong and he needs income or a solution immediately. The entrepreneurial ventures that begin as desperation and occasionally become something else. The jobs he stumbles into because he was in the wrong place or the right place depending on how you look at it. These are the jobs that reveal Homer at his most resourceful, because Homer under pressure, Homer with his back against the financial wall, Homer with Marge giving him the look that means this is serious, is a genuinely creative problem solver. Not a careful one, not a strategic one, but creative. Homer's improvisational capacity, his ability to construct solutions from whatever materials are immediately available, is a consistent feature across 3 decades of professional calamity. He does not plan well. He executes well, in the moment, with what he has, in ways that are not replicable and not explainable, but that frequently work well enough to get through the immediate crisis. This is related to the argument that Homer's intelligence is not absent but merely differently configured. The crisis jobs are where you see the configuration most clearly. Problem-solving under resource constraints and time pressure is a specific cognitive skill that bears only partial relationship to the kind of abstract reasoning that IQ tests measure. Homer's IQ is 55. Homer's ability to get through a crisis with the tools available to him is considerably higher than that number would suggest. The fourth category is the accidental jobs, the careers Homer fell into without planning or wanting them. The positions that arrived because of a misunderstanding or a coincidence, or the specific kind of accident that follows Homer through his life, like a weather system follows a coast. These jobs are the funniest to watch and the most revealing about how the show understands Homer's relationship to fate. Homer Simpson is not the master of his professional destiny. He is not building a career in any recognizable sense. He is moving through a series of situations that were largely not of his choosing, doing his best in each one, and returning to the plant when the situation resolves. The accidental jobs suggest a man who is less navigating his life than being carried by it, borne along by a current he did not choose and cannot fully control, landing periodically in professional circumstances that he then engages with fully and enthusiastically, because full engagement is Homer's default mode, regardless of context. There is something almost Buddhist about this, if you squint. Homer has no attachment to professional outcome. He is fully present in whatever professional role he currently occupies, without the weight of career anxiety or the distraction of long-term professional ambition. He is just in this job, right now, doing this thing, to the best of his considerable specific abilities and the limit of his considerable specific limitations. This is not wisdom. Homer did not arrive at this place through contemplation or practice. He arrived at it through a combination of impulsiveness, limited executive function, and the specific psychological profile of a man who learned very early that the future was not reliably available, and so developed the capacity to be very thoroughly in the present. But the effect is somewhat similar to the effect wisdom produces. Homer is not tortured by what he failed to become. He is not corroded by professional regret. He is here, at the plant, or here in the food truck, or here at whatever this week's job is, and he is doing it with the specific, unguarded enthusiasm of a person who has not calculated whether this is a good use of his time, because he does not do that kind of calculation. The 188 jobs are not evidence of an unfocused life. They are evidence of a specific kind of life. A life of serial full presence, of showing up completely for each new situation, of being unable to sustain the kind of long-term professional identity that most adults construct, because that kind of construction requires a level of strategic self-awareness that Homer's brain has never supported and probably never will. And the plant is always there. Burns is always there, ready to rehire, partly because of the deal with Abe and partly because, as the show has suggested, Homer's particular combination of good-natured incompetence and constitutional inability to ask inconvenient questions is genuinely valuable to a man running a facility full of inconvenient questions that need to not be asked. Homer's professional life is Springfield in miniature, a series of situations he did not plan and cannot fully control, engaged with fully and with genuine warmth, always returning to the same place when the episode is done, the same console with the same coffee and the same warning lights, and the same ancient billionaire who will never learn his name. He does not resent this. He does not even fully see it. He just shows up every morning and tries, in the specific way that Homer tries, which is wholeheartedly and somewhat dangerously and always with the half-eaten donut nearby. That is his professional life. That is 188 jobs and one career. A career that was chosen for him before he was old enough to choose anything, and which he has, without understanding why, returned to every time the world briefly offered him an exit. Number Section 5. Homer and God, the divine relationship Springfield ignores. There is a detail buried in the architecture of The Simpsons that becomes stranger the more carefully you look at it. God, within the show's canonical universe, is real. Not metaphorically real. Not a cultural institution real. Actually demonstrably, narratively real. God exists in the world of The Simpsons the way the power plant exists, the way Burns exists, the way Springfield's improbable geography exists, as a fact of the show's universe that the characters navigate and occasionally bump into. And Homer Simpson has a more direct, more personal, more sustained relationship with this real God than any other character in the show, including Ned Flanders, who has organized his entire life around God's existence and has spent decades in prayer and devotion and the specific kind of faithful attention that you would expect to produce at least some divine response. God talks to Homer. God does not talk to Ned. This is not a small detail. This is one of the more fascinating structural facts about The Simpsons mythology, and it sits in the background of the show's run, never foregrounded, never addressed directly, accumulating significance with each new season without anyone in the narrative ever stopping to remark on it. Let us walk through the direct encounters. Season 4, Episode 3, Homer the Heretic. Homer decides not to attend church and spends a Sunday at home, watching football and cooking bacon and existing in the specific state of uncomplicated contentment that Homer achieves when he is freed from the obligations that structure his week. He falls asleep. He dreams. And in the dream, God appears. This God is not abstract. He is not symbolic. He is a large being with a humanish face and the specific authority that comes with being the literal creator of existence. He sits with Homer. They talk. Homer asks questions. God answers them, with patience and a kind of dry humor that feels oddly appropriate given the audience. And then God tells Homer something that the episode frames as a comforting theological insight, but which, under the coma theory, takes on a quality that is somewhat haunting. Homer will learn the meaning of life, but not yet. His time is coming. 6 months later, approximately, Homer is in a coma. God told Homer his time was coming, and Homer's conscious life ended 6 months later. The coma theory finds this alignment deeply significant, and it is hard to argue with the significance even if you do not fully accept the theory. The show placed that conversation and that coma within the same season, with enough proximity that the connection is not unreasonable to draw. Whether intentional on the writer's part or the kind of retroactive meaning-making that happens when a show runs long enough to create its own mythology, the thread is there. But Homer the Heretic is only the beginning of the Homer-God relationship. There are other encounters, less dramatic but equally telling. Homer prays with an earnestness that the show sometimes plays for comedy and sometimes plays completely straight, and in both registers there is something present in Homer's relationship with prayer that is different from Ned's relationship with prayer. Ned prays with the discipline of someone maintaining a practice. Homer prays with the urgency of someone who genuinely believes he is being heard. And the show suggests, repeatedly, that he is right. Consider the specific quality of Homer's luck across the series. Not the slapstick cartoon luck that saves him from physical consequences. Something more specific than that. The way important things work out for Homer in the moments that matter most. The way his family stays together despite everything that should have destroyed it. The way the right opportunity or the right person or the right piece of information tends to arrive at the moment Homer most needs it. This could be explained by the coma theory, obviously. In a dream being generated by Homer's unconscious mind, the dreamer's desires shape the outcomes. Of course, things work out for Homer. It is his dream. He is writing it. But it could also be explained by something the show keeps putting in front of you without ever stating directly. That Homer Simpson has a relationship with the divine that bypasses the usual channels. That God, who within the show's universe is demonstrably real, has some form of specific attention on this particular man, and that the specific form of that attention is not the kind that rewards good behavior, because Homer's behavior is not reliably good, but the kind that keeps someone in the game, keeps someone connected to the people they love, keeps the story going for reasons that have less to do with merit and more to do with something the show gestures at but never names. Homer's goodness is not legible through the metrics that Ned's goodness is legible through. Ned keeps the rules. Ned attends services. Ned tithes, volunteers, prays on a schedule, maintains the rituals that organized religion provides as the framework for faithful life. These are real things. They have real value. But the show has been quietly arguing for its entire run that they are not the most interesting things about how a person relates to something larger than themselves. Homer keeps almost nothing. He misses church more than he attends. He prays mostly in moments of crisis. His theological knowledge is shallow. His commitment to any specific doctrine is non-existent. He once briefly worshipped a waffle iron, and yet God talks to him. The episode where Homer encounters God face-to-face in a dream is not the only evidence. There are smaller moments. Homer talking upward with the casual directness of someone who knows they are being heard, and the narrative of the episode bearing out that they were right to feel that way. There are the moments where Homer's praying produces results that are technically explainable by coincidence, but that the show frames in a way that seems to suggest the framing is not coincidental. God and Homer have something. It is not a relationship built on Homer's moral record. It is not a relationship built on Homer's devotional practice. It is something else. Something the show has never fully articulated but which seems to involve Homer's specific quality of unguarded sincerity. Homer does not perform his relationship with God. He cannot perform anything in a sustained way. When Homer prays, it is because he actually needs something, and he has decided that this is a reasonable avenue for getting it. When Homer talks to God in his dream, it is a conversation, not a suppliant's monologue. Homer treats God the way Homer treats almost everyone, with directness, warmth, and the occasional irreverent question, because Homer does not have the hierarchical self-awareness to moderate his behavior in front of power. This is the same quality that occasionally makes Homer charming to people who should find him infuriating. He cannot be deferential. He cannot perform appropriate smallness in front of people whose status requires it. He just shows up as himself, at full Homer, in every context, and something about that fullness of self-presentation, that complete lack of strategic self-curation, is apparently compelling even at the level of the divine. Ned is performing goodness. Not insincerely. Ned's goodness is genuine. It runs deep. It is the only framework that makes his life bearable. But it is still performed in the sense that Ned is aware of it, has organized his behavior around it, presents it to the world as his defining attribute. Ned's relationship with God is a relationship between a practitioner and their practice. Homer's relationship with God is messier and less legible and apparently more personal, which is one of the show's quieter reversals. The man who is supposed to represent organized religion's ideal does not receive divine attention, and the man who most clearly does not represent it has the most direct divine relationship in Springfield. This is theologically interesting, independent of any specific religious tradition. Most of the world's major spiritual traditions include some version of the recognition that the divine does not always arrive where it is expected, or in the form that the most disciplined practitioners anticipate. That something in the uncurated, the unguarded, the radically present reaches something that the carefully maintained practice sometimes does not. Homer is radically present. Homer is constitutionally incapable of the self-distancing that meditation teachers call the observing self. Homer has no observing self. He has only the experiencing self, fully in contact with whatever is happening right now, without the buffer of metacognition between the experience and his full engagement with it. This is not a spiritual achievement on Homer's part. It is the result of a brain that does not have the executive function to maintain a metacognitive buffer. But the effect is the same, at least in terms of how the show presents its consequences. Homer is always fully there, in the way that makes him both exhausting and, apparently, interesting to God. The Homer-God relationship also intersects with the question of grace. Not grace in the theological sense, though that is not irrelevant, grace in the narrative sense. The way the show extends grace to Homer across its run, the way his worst behavior tends to produce less lasting damage than it should, the way the people he loves tend to forgive him more completely than his behavior warrants, the way the reset button that Springfield operates on seems to press itself most reliably in Homer's vicinity. Is this grace? Is it luck? Is it the operation of some divine attention that the show has been suggesting since season 4 without ever confirming? The coma theory would say it is the dream protecting its dreamer. The radiation theory would say it is mutated biology, producing aberrant resilience. The God theory, which is not usually cataloged as a Simpsons theory because it is almost too simple, would say it is exactly what it looks like: a man who has an unusual relationship with whatever is running the universe, and who benefits from that relationship without ever fully understanding that he has it. Homer will never understand it. Understanding requires the kind of sustained reflection that Homer's brain cannot sustain. He prays when he needs to pray. He has conversations with God when God appears in his dreams. He moves on, because moving on is what Homer does, and the divine attention moves with him, because apparently that is what it does. Ned Flanders prays every night and waits in silence. Homer forgets to pray most nights and gets an answer anyway. If there is a theology here, it is not a comfortable one for the Ned Flanderses of the world. But it is the theology the show has been quietly constructing for over 3 decades, in the background, underneath the comedy, as patient and steady as the cooling towers rising against the Springfield skyline. Number. Section 6. Homer as a father. The theory that changes everything. There is a moment in The Simpsons that television scholars have written about, with a frequency that suggests it struck something real. Homer is standing in Bart's doorway at night. Bart is asleep. Homer is watching his son sleep with an expression that is not his usual expression, not the expression of mild bewilderment, or cartoon frustration, or bovine contentment that defines most of Homer's emotional states. The expression is one of pure, uncomplicated love. The kind that does not need reciprocation because it is not asking for anything. The kind that just radiates toward its object with no agenda, no requirement, no performance. Homer watches Bart sleep, and you can feel, through the screen, that this man would walk into a burning building for the child who makes his life more difficult approximately 300 days out of every year. He would do it without thinking, without calculating, without the moment of self-consideration that most people would experience before doing something genuinely brave. He would just do it because Bart is his, and being his is the only qualification that matters. This is Homer Simpson as a father. Not the Homer who strangles Bart, which is a running gag that has aged in ways the show is now self-conscious about. Not the Homer who forgets school events and misses concerts, and is generally the least organized parent in the family by a substantial margin. This Homer, the one standing in the doorway, is the Homer that the entire strangling gag has been masking for years. A man who loves his children with the kind of totality that very few adults actually achieve, and almost none of them admit to. The theory that changes how you watch Homer as a father is not a dramatic conspiracy theory. It is a perceptual shift. It is the shift that happens when you stop watching Homer through the frame of his failures, which are real and frequent and sometimes genuinely serious, and start watching him through the frame of his intentions, which are almost uniformly good and are frequently the most loving things happening in any given scene, even when they are producing the worst outcomes. Homer never means to fail his children. This sounds obvious. Most parents do not mean to fail their children. But the distinction matters for Homer because the gap between his intentions and his executions is so wide and so consistently wide that it has become the defining feature of his parenting, the thing that gets discussed and analyzed, while the intentions themselves are largely ignored because they do not produce the interesting narrative outcomes. Homer means with his whole heart to be a good father. He thinks about being a good father. He works at it, in his way, with the specific tools his brain and his history provide. He shows up to things. He participates in his children's lives with a fullness of presence that is sometimes disruptive and sometimes chaotic but is rarely absent. Homer Simpson is not an emotionally unavailable father. He is an emotionally available father who does not always know what to do with the emotions once they arrive. This distinction between availability and competence is the thing the show has been exploring across the Homer as parent narrative for 36 years. Homer is present. He is not always competent. He is devoted. He is not always effective. And the question the show keeps returning to, without ever answering definitively, is whether presence and devotion are enough. Whether a father who shows up with his whole heart and limited executive function is giving his children something real, or whether his limitations undermine the offering. The children's responses to Homer as a father are the most interesting data set for this question. Bart's relationship with Homer is the most complex and the most analyzed, partly because it is the most visible and partly because it generates the most comedy. Bart and Homer are at war with each other in the ongoing low-grade way that fathers and sons are often at war when they are too similar to exist comfortably in the same space. The Bart-Homer dynamic is built on this resemblance that neither of them fully acknowledges. They are both impulsive, both driven by immediate feeling rather than long-term planning, both likely to make choices that seem excellent in the moment and disastrous in retrospect, both profoundly unwilling to perform emotions they do not actually feel. The strangling is the show's most concentrated expression of this dynamic. It is Homer's frustration finding its way out through a physical action that is inappropriate and that the show has always known as inappropriate, which is why it keeps being staged and restaged and recontextualized across the run, sometimes as pure comedy, sometimes with a discomfort that suggests the show is not entirely at peace with having made this gag so central. But beneath the strangling, beneath the frustration and the exasperation, and the specific quality of being driven to madness by someone who is essentially a smaller, more dangerous version of yourself, there is the doorway. There is Homer watching Bart sleep. There is the accumulated weight of episodes where Homer does something genuinely selfless for Bart, something that costs him something real, not for any strategic parenting reason, but simply because Bart needed it and Homer noticed. Homer's relationship with Lisa is different in every register and is, arguably, the more interesting of the two, precisely because it is so apparently mismatched. Lisa is the smartest person in the family. Homer is the least conventionally intelligent person in the family. Lisa is principled, organized, forward-planning, deeply concerned with the world beyond Evergreen Terrace. Homer is impulsive, disorganized, broadly unconcerned with anything beyond the immediate domestic situation unless something forces his attention outward. They should have nothing to talk about. They should be in parallel worlds within the same household, each incomprehensible to the other, each carrying a private sense of not being understood by someone who is supposed to understand them. But they connect. Across hundreds of episodes, Homer and Lisa find each other in ways that transcend the apparent incompatibility. And the mechanism of their connection is interesting. It is not intellectual. Homer cannot follow Lisa's arguments. He cannot engage with her on her home territory. But he can feel her. He can sense when Lisa is struggling or lonely or despairing in the way that very smart children sometimes despair when the world seems impervious to their intelligence. And when he feels it, he moves toward her. Not with the right words or the right solution, but with the right quality of presence, with the simple fact of his being there, paying attention, caring about whatever is happening even when he does not fully understand it. Homer has saved Lisa's inner life a dozen times across the show's run, not by solving her problems, by showing up in her problems. By sitting with her in the difficulty and communicating, through the specific language of his presence, that she is not alone in it. This is not a small thing. Parenting research consistently identifies parental attunement, the capacity to sense and respond to a child's emotional state, as one of the most significant predictors of healthy attachment and long-term emotional well-being. Homer's IQ is 55. His parental attunement, particularly toward Lisa, is considerably higher than that number would suggest. Maggie is the most mysterious member of the relationship triangle, partly because Maggie's interiority is so carefully concealed by the show's choice to keep her pre-verbal, and partly because the Homer-Maggie relationship has been explored in fewer episodes than the Homer-Bart or Homer-Lisa relationships. But what has been shown is telling. Homer feels something toward Maggie that the show has never quite found the language for. It is a quality of protectiveness that runs deeper than what he feels toward the older children, possibly because Maggie is more obviously vulnerable, possibly because she is the youngest and Homer has a soft spot for youngest child vulnerability that connects to something in his own history, possibly because Maggie's silence makes her a vessel for Homer's projections in a way the verbal children cannot be. The episodes that center the Homer-Maggie relationship tend to be the ones where the show goes emotionally quiet, where the comedy steps back and lets something more tender occupy the space. Homer holding Maggie. Homer watching Maggie. The specific way Homer's face changes when Maggie makes a sound or reaches toward him or does something that indicates awareness of his presence. There is a reading of Homer as a father that is almost unbearably poignant under the coma theory. If Homer has been unconscious since 1993, if every episode since then is the production of his dreaming mind, then his children are the dream's most important project. His unconscious mind generates Bart exactly as Bart was on the day Homer went under. Mischievous, chaotic, present, the kind of child who is constantly causing problems and constantly, implicitly, asking to be loved. His unconscious mind generates Lisa as she was, brilliant, lonely, asking questions no one wants to answer. His unconscious mind generates Maggie as she was, small, silent, watching everything, the baby who could not yet tell him what she was thinking. The coma Homer can give his children everything except time. He can give them his full presence, his complete devotion, the kind of father love that in the waking world had to compete with the pressures of employment and financial stress, and the accumulated weight of being Homer Simpson in Springfield. In the dream, all of that falls away. All that remains is the relationship, the pure desire to be there for these three specific people in whatever way is available to him. That desire, more than any theory about radiation or timelines or the secret architecture of Springfield, is the emotional truth at the center of The Simpsons. Homer wants to be a good father. He wants it the way he wanted to be loved as a child, completely without reservation, without the strategic calculation of what it will cost him. He is not a good father by conventional metrics. He will never be a good father by conventional metrics. But he is fully there, completely devoted, always showing up, even when showing up makes things worse. And his children, all three of them, know this. They know it the way children know things that cannot be articulated. In the body, in the quality of the attachment, in the specific feeling of being in the presence of someone who would do anything for you. Homer would do anything for them. And he would do it wrong, and the house would be on fire, and something valuable would be broken, and Marge would be giving him the look. And he would be there. Every time he would be there. That is the Homer Simpson fatherhood theory. Not a conspiracy, not a hidden pattern, just the simple, devastating fact of a man who loves his children with everything he has, and who has been doing so without credit, without recognition, without anyone in Springfield or outside it stopping to say, "This man, despite everything, loves his children completely." The doorway, the boy asleep, the father watching. That is the show. That has always been the show. Section 7. Homer's body. The medical impossibility of Springfield's safety inspector. Let us be precise about what Homer's body has survived, because the precision is important. The specificity is what makes this section of the Homer mythology something other than a standard cartoon resilience trope. Homer has been hit by a car 15 times in canonical, non-treehouse of horror episodes. He has been shot 5 times. He has fallen from a significant height on 11 separate occasions. He has been electrocuted 7 times. He has been burned, buried, bitten, crushed, partially dissolved in acid, struck by lightning, run over by a lawnmower, swallowed by a whale, attacked by a bear, and in one episode, had his body used as a vessel for demonic possession in a way that should have produced at minimum severe psychological trauma and at maximum several categories of cellular damage. He has also undergone surgery on his brain, had a crayon removed from his frontal lobe, experienced what the show's medical professionals identified as at least 3 separate heart attacks, and survived a direct encounter with what was described as a high-voltage electrical system that would, in the real world, have ended the biological functions of a human body with clinical certainty. He comes back from all of it, not slowly, not with visible recovery time, not with the narrative arc of a person healing. He comes back at the start of the next scene, or sometimes within the same scene, or in one notable episode, within the same sentence. Homer's body does not behave like a human body. It behaves like something that has been stress-tested beyond human parameters and has adapted to the stress in ways that no medical literature documents. The radiation theory is the most comprehensive explanation available within the show's own narrative logic. If the Springfield nuclear power plant has been leaking radioactive material into the town's environment for decades, and if Homer, as the safety inspector who works in direct proximity to the reactor core every working day of his adult life, has been receiving a higher dose than anyone else in Springfield, then Homer is the resident who has been most thoroughly altered by whatever the contamination does to biological tissue. The alterations, as the radiation theory proposes them, are not limited to the cosmetic, the yellow skin, the 4 fingers, the particular skull shape that the show's character design has always attributed to stylized cartoon aesthetics. The alterations run deeper. They affect cellular repair mechanisms. They affect pain threshold and recovery rate. They produce, in the body of someone who has been absorbing radiation at Homer's proximity and duration, a resilience that exceeds anything a normal biological process would generate. Homer's body does not heal the way human bodies heal. It reconstitutes itself. The distinction is meaningful. Healing is a slow process of cellular repair, wound closure, inflammation management. Homer's recovery seems to operate on a different timeline entirely, one that compresses the standard healing arc to a degree that should be biologically impossible. But should be impossible is doing a lot of work in Springfield, where the impossible has been the baseline operating condition since the first episode. The question is not whether Homer's recovery rate is impossible. It demonstrably is, by any standard medical measure. The question is what explains it, within the show's internal logic. The radiation theory says adaptation. Decades of exposure have selected for cellular mechanisms that can operate under conditions of continuous damage. Homer's body has essentially learned to exist in a state of permanent low-level cellular repair, maintaining that process as a background operation the way a modern computer maintains background processes that the user does not see. When the damage is severe enough to be visible, the background process scales up to match it. The result is a recovery rate that looks miraculous but is, under the radiation theory, simply the product of forced biological adaptation. There is another dimension to this that the show has never addressed directly, but that exists as a logical implication: Homer's pain experience. Homer is often depicted experiencing what should be enormous pain, with a reaction that is disproportionate to the damage. Sometimes he screams. Sometimes he says, "Ow." Sometimes he says nothing at all and continues doing the thing he was doing before the injury arrived. The inconsistency in his pain responses is usually read as a cartoon convention, an inconsistency the show does not track because pain is not the point of the scene. But if you track it, a pattern emerges. Homer's pain response is most visible when the injury is less severe. When the damage is genuinely catastrophic, his response tends to diminish relative to the scale of what happened to him. A stubbed toe produces a scream. Being hit by a car produces, approximately, getting up and continuing. This is inverted from the human experience. Humans feel small injuries acutely, and large injuries are sometimes accompanied by a neurological shock response that temporarily mutes the pain signal. Homer's inversion of this pattern suggests a nervous system that has recalibrated its relationship to pain, possibly because the chronic low-level exposure to radiation has produced a chronic low-level damage signal that has desensitized the receptors, which would mean Homer is not in less pain than a normal person would be. He is in more pain, constantly, as a baseline. So much more pain that the pain from additional injuries is effectively noise against an already overwhelming signal. His apparent insensitivity to injury is not the absence of pain. It is the presence of so much continuous pain that additional pain registers as incremental rather than extreme. This reading makes Homer's daily existence considerably more sobering than the show's comic framing suggests, and it connects directly to the broader radiation theory. Homer's body is not simply resilient. It is a body in chronic duress that has adapted to its own duress in ways that make it appear, from the outside, as though the duress is not landing. The skull is worth its own paragraph. Homer's skull has been documented, within the show's medical canon, as having an unusual structure. More specifically, a particular episode reveals that Homer's brain is oddly configured, with brain matter distributed in ways that deviate from standard human anatomy. The joke is that Homer's brain has organized itself to accommodate the fat content of his diet. The joke is also, perhaps, a way of saying something the show cannot say directly, that Homer's neural architecture has been physically altered by whatever has been happening to him over decades of radiation exposure. The 4 fingers. Every resident of Springfield has 4 fingers. This is attributed to the standard cartoon convention of simplifying character design. But the radiation theory points out that within the show's internal logic, the difference between Springfield residents and visiting characters is visually marked. Outsiders are drawn with proportions that more closely approximate actual human anatomy. If the show's art style were simply simplification, it would simplify everyone equally. The selective application of the simplified anatomy to Springfield residents and not to visitors is the tell. 4 fingers is not a minor deviation from human anatomy. It is a significant one. The development of the 5th digit in human hands is a function of specific genetic processes that are stable across the entire human species. Producing a population in which everyone has 4 fingers would require either a genetic mutation that is dominant, heritable, and somehow universal across the Springfield population, or an environmental factor that is affecting every resident's biological development. The radiation theory proposes the environmental factor. The power plant has been running long enough, leaking consistently enough, and affecting enough generations of Springfield residents that the physical anomaly has propagated through the population. The 4 fingers are not a joke. They are a symptom, a visible, consistent, population-wide symptom of what 4 decades of nuclear contamination does to the human body across generations. Homer's body contains all of this, every strange resilience, every improbable recovery, every deviation from normal human biology. He carries the archive of Springfield's contamination in his cells, in his neural architecture, in the structural anomalies of a body that has been shaped by its environment in ways that no body should be shaped. And he goes to work every day, eats his donuts, sits behind his console, survives everything. Not because he is lucky, because the plant already made sure he is built for this. Number. Section 8. Homer's fears, abandonment, failure, and the engine behind every episode. Strip away the comedy, strip away the donuts, and the strangling and the specific cartoon physics of Homer's catastrophes. Strip away the 188 jobs, and the celebrity encounters, and the episodes that take the show into pure absurdism. Strip all of it away, and what you find at the center of Homer Simpson is a very specific configuration of fear. Homer is afraid of being left. He is afraid of not being enough. He is afraid that the people he loves will discover some version of the truth he has spent his life suspecting about himself. That he is, at some fundamental level, the kind of person that people eventually leave. That he is too much in some ways and not enough in others. And that the balance will eventually tip toward the recognition that someone else, some other version of a husband or father or friend, would have served everyone better. This fear is not irrational, it has history. It is the fear of a boy who woke up one morning to find his mother gone, and who was told she was dead, and who built his entire subsequent emotional architecture around that foundational loss. The fear drives him, not toward success in any conventional sense, toward connection, toward the maintenance of the relationships that constitute his life, toward keeping the family together with the specific desperation of someone who knows, in the way that children know things they cannot articulate, what it feels like when the family does not stay together. When Homer does something catastrophically ill-advised, which is often, the thing underneath the action is almost always this fear. He chases recognition because being recognized means being real to the people who matter. He pursues approval with an enthusiasm that tips into desperation because approval means he is not about to be left. He becomes competitive, jealous, occasionally petty, because these emotions are all downstream of the same basic terror. That he is not enough, that the people who currently love him will figure this out, that the family on Evergreen Terrace is one revelation away from understanding that it would function better without him. The strangling is in this light, and it is an uncomfortable light, but it is the most honest one available. The strangling of Bart is Homer's frustration bypassing his extremely limited impulse control. But the frustration itself, if you trace it back to its source, is not primarily frustration with Bart. It is frustration with himself, with his own inadequacy as a parent, with the gap between what he wants to be for Bart and what he actually is. Bart's behavior is the trigger. Homer's terror of his own insufficiency is the fuel. This is not an excuse for the strangling. Nothing makes the strangling particularly defensible. But understanding its emotional origin changes what you are watching when you watch it. You are not watching a cartoon man cartoon strangling a cartoon child. You are watching a man who has spent his whole life afraid he is not good enough strangling the person who has most recently provided evidence for that fear, which is dark, which is not comfortable, which is why the show keeps it quick and comic and then resets. Homer's fear of abandonment also explains his relationship with Marge in ways that the romantic framing sometimes obscures. Homer is not simply in love with Marge. Homer needs Marge in the specific way that people who have experienced early abandonment need their primary attachment. Not as preference, but as survival. This is not healthy exactly. Therapists would have words for it, but it is real, and it is the thing underneath the romantic gestures and the anniversary episodes and the moments where Homer does something genuinely selfless in the service of keeping Marge happy and close. When the marriage is threatened, in the episodes that put real pressure on the bond, Homer's response has a quality of panic that exceeds what you would expect from someone who is simply unhappy about the possibility of losing a partner. It has the quality of someone whose fundamental sense of safety is under threat. Because it is. Marge is not just Homer's wife. She is the proof that he is lovable. That's someone who knows him fully, who has seen him at his worst and his most ridiculous and his most vulnerable, has chosen to stay anyway. If Marge leaves, the proof disappears. And without the proof, Homer is back in that house, at 6 years old, waking up to find that the person who was supposed to be there is gone. His relationship with his children, particularly Bart, is downstream of the same fear. Homer's intense emotional investment in Bart, which produces both his most loving parenting moments and his most frustrating ones, is the investment of a man who knows what it means for a father-child relationship to be absent, who has lived in that absence, who will do almost anything to prevent the same thing from happening to his son. He does not want to be Abe. This is probably the most conscious parenting goal Homer has. Somewhere in his awareness, in the part of his brain that is capable of sustained desire even when it is not capable of sustained strategic planning, Homer does not want to be his father. He does not want to be distant. He does not want to be the kind of parent whose love is felt as absence rather than presence. He wants to be there, fully, visibly, in the way that Abe was not there for Homer and Mona was not there because she could not be. He is not always successful. He is not always close. But he is always trying, and the trying is legible, even to the children he is trying for, even when the execution is disastrous. Homer's fear of failure is related to but distinct from his fear of abandonment. The fear of failure is professional, social, external. It is the fear of being seen as inadequate by people who are not his core family, by the world outside Evergreen Terrace. Homer puts himself forward into situations that most people would avoid because the drive for recognition is stronger than the fear of public failure. But when he fails publicly, when the job does not work out or the scheme collapses or the thing he was so enthusiastic about turns out to be exactly as catastrophic as anyone watching could have predicted, Homer's response has a specific quality of shame that is worth noticing. Homer experiences shame. He does not always name it or process it in any particularly useful way, because his executive function is not equipped for that kind of reflective processing. But the emotion is present. You can see it in the way he shrinks when the failure is public, in the way he retreats to the couch after a disaster, in the way he sometimes does not want to face Marge after something goes badly, not because he is afraid of her anger, but because he is afraid of the recognition in her eyes that what he feared about himself turns out to be true. He is not good enough. He never has been. The town has been telling him this for decades, implicitly, in the way towns tell things to people who are not the success stories they had in mind. Burns tells it to Homer every time he fails to remember his name. The plant tells it to Homer every time it nearly has a meltdown on Homer's watch. The school tells it to Homer every time Bart is in trouble, and Homer has no idea why the principal is calling. And Homer gets up every morning and goes back. This is, when you hold it against the backdrop of all his fears, actually remarkable. A man who is afraid of failure and who fails with impressive regularity keeps showing up at the site of the failure. He does not withdraw. He does not give up. He does not develop the kind of protective cynicism that insulates people from care enough that the failures stop hurting. Homer keeps caring, he keeps showing up, he keeps trying, with the specific kind of trying that does not result in improved outcomes but that keeps the heart in the game, keeps the connection alive, keeps the family on Evergreen Terrace functioning at the level that functioning means in the Simpson household, which is a level below optimal but considerably above dissolution. The engine behind every episode is not comedy. It is not Homer's capacity for disaster or his relationship with Duff Beer or the specific cartoon physics of Springfield. The engine is this: a man who is afraid, who has always been afraid, who is trying every week to outrun the fear through the specific mechanism of showing up, being present, doing the thing, however badly, and hoping that his presence is enough to hold the people he loves close enough that they do not leave. They keep not leaving. And he keeps being surprised by this. And the surprise is the most human thing about him. Section 9. Homer's Dreams Within the Dream, the episodes that break reality. Every year, usually in October, The Simpsons steps outside its own continuity and does something the regular episodes cannot do. The Treehouse of Horror anthology structure removes the show from its normal rules and lets the writers imagine Homer and his family in situations that the weekly sitcom format cannot support. Death is real in these episodes. Consequence is real. The reset that protects the characters in every other context does not apply. And what the show does with this freedom, season after season, is remarkable for a specific reason. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are frequently the episodes that explore Homer most deeply. Not most comically. Most honestly. With the reality-bending premise as cover, the show lets Homer be afraid in ways the regular episodes do not, lets him face loss and mortality, and the specific existential weight of being Homer Simpson in ways the comedy format usually requires it to deflect. This is not an accident. The horror anthology format gives the writers permission to go to places the family sitcom cannot go. And the places they keep going are the places that the theories about Homer's psyche point to: his fear of loss, his relationship with death, his deep need to protect the family, and his terror of being insufficient to the task. Look at what Homer faces in the Treehouse episodes across the run. He faces his own death repeatedly, in various configurations. He faces the deaths of his family. He faces the dissolution of everything he has built, the house gone, the people gone, the specific texture of his life on Evergreen Terrace erased by whatever the horror plot requires. And in facing these things, Homer reveals something that the regular episodes show only in glimpses: the depth of what the life on Evergreen Terrace means to him. Homer in the Treehouse episodes is frightened. Not in the cartoon way of someone encountering a jump scare, in the genuine way of someone whose worst fears are being given narrative form. The fear of losing Marge, the fear of losing the children, the fear of finding himself in a world where the structures that make his life livable, the house, the job, the family, the couch, the donuts, the beer, the television at the end of a long day, have been stripped away and replaced with something that requires him to be more capable and more resilient than he knows he is. What Homer does in the Treehouse episodes, when confronted with these fears made concrete, is instructive. He does not rise to the occasion in the way action movie heroes rise to occasions. He does not discover a competence he did not know he had. He does something simpler and more revealing. He tries. With everything he has, which is not always enough, but which is always everything, he tries to get back to the family, to protect them, to hold the life together against whatever the horror plot is doing to it. The Treehouse episodes read differently if you accept the coma theory. If every episode after April 1993 is a dream produced by Homer's unconscious mind, then the Treehouse of Horror episodes are the dream's nightmare functions. They are the moments when Homer's dreaming brain allows the worst possibilities to surface. When the suppressed terror of what the coma means, what not waking up means, what the life he is dreaming about not being real would mean, breaks through the surface of the domestic comedy and takes on narrative form. The monsters and aliens and supernatural threats of the Treehouse episodes are not random horror genre exercises. They are the specific shapes of Homer's deepest fears given the only form his dreaming mind can give them. The forms of television, of genre, of the cultural materials his unconscious is absorbing from the hospital room where his body lies, and the television in the room that his dreaming mind transforms into story. He is afraid of losing Marge. In the dream, this becomes a witch or a demon or a parallel universe scenario where Marge is gone or changed beyond recognition. He is afraid of being unable to protect his children. In the dream, this becomes a monster at the door, an alien invasion, a world where children are in danger and fathers are inadequate to the threat. He is afraid of being alone. In the dream, this becomes the post-apocalyptic scenario, the last man on Earth scenario, the specific horror of a world emptied of the people who make his existence bearable. The Treehouse episodes, watched through this lens, are not a departure from the emotional core of The Simpsons. They are its most direct expression. The family sitcom format requires that the fears be covered with comedy, managed with the reset button, made bearable by the structural guarantee that everything will be fine by the next episode. The horror anthology format removes those protections and lets the fears speak clearly, in the only language they have, the language of nightmare. Outside the Treehouse structure, there are episodes that blur the line between dream and reality in ways that are worth examining. The episode where Homer discovers that Springfield is a television show. The episodes that use alternate universe premises. The episodes that place Homer in explicitly fantastical situations without the Treehouse frame to contextualize them. What these episodes share is a quality of unreality that the show seems almost to be commenting on from within. A self-awareness about the constructed nature of Homer's world that sits in interesting tension with the show's normal mode of presenting Springfield as a consistent, navigable reality. In the most reality-disrupting of these episodes, the show seems to be testing whether Homer can perceive what the coma theory suggests is actually true about his situation, that the world he is living in is not the world he left, that something is wrong with the reality he is inhabiting, that the clues are everywhere if he can see them. He cannot see them. Homer, even in the episodes that put the unreality of his world most directly in front of him, cannot see the unreality. His perception remains bounded by the dream, limited to what the dream allows him to see, and the show's commitment to this limitation, to Homer's inability to step outside his own story and perceive it as a story, is one of the more consistent things about it across its run. Homer does not suspect he is dreaming, the dreamer never does. But the show, particularly in the episodes that bend the most towards self-awareness, seems to suspect it, seems to be leaving doors open, seems to be allowing the possibility, not as a statement but as a negative space, that the man on the couch is not the man he thinks he is, in the place he thinks he is, living the life he thinks he is living. And in those moments, when the show allows the possibility to breathe briefly before the comedy reasserts itself and the reset arrives, Homer's dreams within the dream become the most honest version of the show. The version where the show is talking to itself about what it is. It is a dream. The dreamer is afraid. The dream keeps going anyway. Number. Section 10. Homer and Burns, the relationship that defines Springfield. Charles Montgomery Burns has worked with Homer Simpson for the entire run of The Simpsons. He has also, in all likelihood, been shaping Homer's life since before Homer was born. The relationship between these two men, between the billionaire who cannot remember his employee's name and the employee who cannot understand why his employer will not remember it, is not just a running gag or a comedy of contrast bit that the show returns to when it needs an easy joke. It is the show's central relationship, more central than Homer and Marge, which is a love story and therefore operates in a different register. More central than Homer and Bart, which is a family story with the particular emotional texture of fathers and sons. The Homer-Burns relationship is a power relationship, and power relationships, as the theories about Springfield have always suggested, are the fundamental grammar of the town. Burns does not know Homer's name. This is established early in the show's run, and it has never been resolved. Homer has worked for Burns for decades. He is one of Burns's most continuously employed workers. He has, in his fumbling way, been involved in or adjacent to many of the significant events of Burns's professional and personal life. He once helped save Burns's life. He has received more personal attention from Burns than most employees ever do. and Burns does not know his name. The comedy of this is clear. The tragedy of it, once you understand the relationship between Burns and Homer's history, is considerably more interesting. Burns knows Homer's name. He has to. Burns is not simply forgetful in a generalized sense. Burns's memory for things that matter to him is sharp, strategic, and extensive. He remembers political figures and financial rivals and the details of contracts signed decades ago. He remembers the specific circumstances of every deal that has served his interests. He remembers, in the Mother Simpson arc, the face of a woman he saw for a few moments decades earlier, well enough to identify her from a moving vehicle. Burns's failure to remember Homer's name is not cognitive decline. It is a choice. It is the deliberate exercise of the social power that determines whose existence is worth acknowledging and whose is not. Burns has decided, with the certainty of someone who has operated at the top of a hierarchy for a century, that Homer Simpson does not merit the minimal act of name remembering. He is a body in Sector 7G. He is a function. He is not a person in the sense that Burns uses the category person, which is approximately the same sense that Burns uses the category relevant. This is not unique to Homer. Burns does it to many people. But with Homer, the choice to not remember has a specific dimension that makes it something other than simple aristocratic disdain. Burns has a history with Homer's family. Burns drove Homer's mother underground. Burns struck the deal with Abe that guaranteed Homer's employment. Burns has been, for Homer's entire life, the gravitational center around which Homer's story has orbited without Homer knowing it. Burns knows all of this. Burns is the one who built the architecture, and in this context, the name-forgetting takes on a quality that is less like casual, class-based dismissal and more like something deliberate. By refusing to remember Homer's name, Burns ensures a specific dynamic. Homer perpetually reaching for recognition from the one person in his life most structurally designed to withhold it, Burns perpetually reinforcing Homer's inadequacy in the one professional relationship Homer cannot exit. It is, viewed in this light, a form of control so elegant it barely needs maintenance. Homer's psychological need for recognition, the need produced by his motherless childhood and his cold father, and the accumulated message of decades that he is not enough, makes him exquisitely sensitive to Burns's withholding. And Burns's withholding costs Burns nothing, while providing him with an employee who is too emotionally invested in his employer's opinion to effectively resist anything the employer asks of him. Homer has, across the run of the show, done things for Burns that no rational employee would do, and that no employee with a healthy relationship to their employer and their own self-worth would do. He has covered up Burns's misdeeds. He has participated in Burns's schemes. He has been endangered by Burns's decisions and returned to work the next day. He has had moments of genuine anger at Burns, genuine recognition of the power dynamic and its unfairness, and he has in every case returned to the plant and resumed the relationship as though the moment of clarity did not happen. The reset is partly the show's structural mechanism and partly something else. Homer's psychological inability to sustain the clarity that would be required to permanently alter the relationship with Burns. The clarity arrives, the recognition lands, the episode provides the confrontation, and then the next episode begins and Homer is back in Sector 7G. Because the clarity requires a kind of sustained self-regard that Homer's history has not equipped him to maintain. Burns, for his part, has a relationship with Homer that is more complicated than pure instrumentalization, though instrumentalization is certainly the primary mode. There are episodes where Burns interacts with Homer in ways that suggest something closer to regard, not affection exactly, but the specific quality of interest that a complicated person sometimes develops towards someone they have been using for long enough that the using has generated a form of intimacy. Burns has been inside Homer's house, has met Homer's family, has in various episodes been placed in situations where Homer's fundamental decency is the most immediate human thing in his vicinity, and Burns has responded to it in ways that the show does not fully explore. But that suggests the possibility that something in Burns recognizes something in Homer that his usual framework for evaluating people cannot account for. Homer is too simple to be afraid of Burns in the sustained way that Burns's power should produce. Homer's cognitive profile does not support the kind of political risk assessment that would make him appropriately cautious in the presence of the most powerful man in Springfield. He is direct with Burns in a way that should be career-ending and that Burns, inexplicably, tolerates. He argues with Burns. He contradicts Burns. He has, on multiple occasions, shouted at Burns or physically confronted him in ways that no other employee would dare, and that Burns responds to with something that looks, if you squint, like amusement. Burns is used to being managed. He is used to people calculating their behavior in his presence, adjusting their presentation to manage his ego and their own exposure. Homer does not do this. Homer cannot do this. Homer's brain does not run the calculation that produces the management. He just shows up, fully Homer, in front of the most powerful man in Springfield with the same directness he brings to every other human encounter. And Burns, who has not experienced undiluted human directness since approximately 1920, does not quite know what to do with it. The result is an asymmetric relationship with an odd kind of intimacy at its center. Burns holds all the power, and Homer does not quite realize it, which means Homer treats Burns with a degree of casualness that no one else in Springfield would risk, and Burns is unable to fully resist the novelty of this. The conspiracy reading of this relationship, the version that connects Burns to Homer's mother, and to Abe's deal, and to the crayon, and to the radiation, and to the entire systematic dismantling of Homer's potential, makes Burns into something almost mythological. Not a comedic villain, not even a dramatic villain, a force. The gravitational center around which Homer's story has always orbited without Homer's knowledge, pulling him in and keeping him there through a combination of economic dependency, psychological manipulation, and the specific kind of structural control that does not require the controller to do anything active because the system is already designed to do the work. Burns did not have to ruin Homer's life deliberately. He just had to build the plant, drive out Mona, make the deal with Abe, and wait. The town did the rest. The radiation did the rest. Homer's own psychology did the rest. Burns did not orchestrate Homer's limitations. He simply created the conditions in which those limitations became Homer's defining characteristics. And then he put Homer in the most consequential position in the plant and forgot his name. The relationship between Homer and Burns is the relationship between Springfield and everything Springfield does to its residents. Burns is the cause, Homer is the symptom. And the tragedy is that Homer, who feels the symptoms every day of his life, has never once understood the cause. He goes to work, he eats his donut, he sits behind the console. He waves at Burns when Burns passes through, using a name he has always known that Burns will not return. And Burns walks past, already thinking about something else, the name already gone. Number. Section 11. The Last Homer Theory. What happens when the loop finally breaks? We have been in Springfield for a long time now, longer than most visits, long enough to see the patterns that accumulate under the surface of 3.5 decades of episodes, long enough to understand that the questions the show refuses to answer are not oversights, they are structural commitments. The show has decided, deliberately and with full awareness, to leave certain things permanently unresolved, to keep certain doors shut, to maintain, in the center of its mythology, a space of irreducible uncertainty that no theory can fully collapse. But there is a final question that all the other questions are circling. A question that is implicit in the coma theory and the radiation theory and the floating timeline and the Burns conspiracy and the Mona backstory and the Homer-God relationship and all the 188 jobs and the doorway and the sleeping boy. The question is simple, and the show has never answered it and probably never will. What happens to Homer in the end? Not what happens in the finale, if there ever is a finale. Not what the narrative resolves or leaves unresolved in the last episode of the last season. What happens to Homer Simpson, the man, the person, the boy who woke up to find his mother gone and who spent the next several decades trying to build something that would hold? The floating timeline says he does not age. The characters are frozen at the ages they were in 1989, cycling through the same domestic life in a permanent present that moves forward culturally but not temporally. Bart will be 10 in 2050 if the show is still running in 2050. Lisa will be 8. Maggie will be 1. Homer will be roughly mid-30s, which is not the age the 1989 Homer was supposed to be, but which is the age the show has converged on as it keeps pushing the backstory forward to maintain the permanent present. The freeze is the show's most explicit statement about what it is trying to do. It is trying to hold something still. It is trying to prevent the arrival of the thing that arrives when families get older and children grow up and parents age and the house becomes quieter and the couch has fewer people on it. It is trying to stop the clock at the moment when the family is most completely itself. When all five people are still under the same roof, and the children are still children, and the parents are still fully in the middle of the story rather than at its end. The freeze is Homer's dream logic, if the coma theory is right. The freeze is Burns's radiation altering the biology of the town, if the radiation theory is right. The freeze is Springfield's collective social contract of denial, if the principal and the pauper theory is right. And the freeze is all of these simultaneously, which is the show's answer when you push it on any of the theories individually. Yes, and also yes, and also yes. Springfield contains multiple true explanations for the same impossible facts, which is one of the things that makes it feel real in the specific way fiction feels real when it is working. What the freeze cannot do, ultimately, is prevent the arrival of meaning. The show can stop the clock. It cannot stop the audience from aging. Cannot stop the viewers who watched the first episode as children from now watching it as middle-aged people who recognize something in Homer that they did not recognize when they were 12. Cannot stop the generation of parents who identified with Marge from watching with a different kind of attention once their own children are the age Bart is in the show. Cannot stop the grandparents who remember television before The Simpsons from watching with the specific quality of attention that comes from having lived long enough to understand what the show is actually about. The audience ages even though the show does not, and as the audience ages, the show means different things. A viewer who was Bart's age when the show began is now Homer's age. They have, in the decades since 1989, acquired a marriage, possibly children, certainly a relationship with failure and recovery, and the specific texture of trying to be a good parent with the tools that were available to them. They have made their own version of Homer's journey, with their own version of Homer's fears and Homer's loves, and Homer's spectacular collapses, and Homer's equally spectacular recoveries. And they watch Homer now from inside Homer's perspective, from the position of someone who has been the parent in the doorway, who has watched a child sleep, and felt the specific quality of that love that does not need reciprocation because it is not asking for anything. This is what the last Homer theory is. Not a theory about what will happen when the show ends. A theory about what the show has already done, is already doing, will keep doing as long as it runs. The show is not a story about Homer Simpson. It is a mirror. It is showing you something about your own life, in the guise of showing you a cartoon family in a fictional town. Homer's childhood, with its specific loss and its specific adaptation, is legible to anyone who has experienced loss and adapted to it. Homer's marriage, with its specific tensions and its specific holds, is legible to anyone who has been in a long relationship and navigated the gap between who they hoped they would be for someone and who they actually are. Homer's parenting, with its specific combination of full presence and limited competence, is legible to every parent who has ever stood in a doorway at night and watched their child sleep and felt the weight of loving someone more than they know how to protect them. Homer's fear of abandonment is legible to everyone who has ever been afraid that the people they love will eventually understand who they really are and leave. Homer's persistence, his getting back up, his returning to the couch and the plant and the family after every catastrophe, is legible to everyone who has ever had to keep going, because stopping was not an option, and also because, underneath the obligation, something in them actually wanted to keep going. Wanted the donut and the beer and the television and the family on the couch, messy and loud and imperfect and somehow, impossibly, exactly right. The show will probably never give Homer a proper ending. The floating timeline makes proper endings structurally incompatible with what the show is. But the theories have always been pointing toward an ending, or at least toward an understanding of what an ending would mean if it arrived. Under the coma theory, Homer wakes up, or he does not. If he wakes up, he finds out how much time has passed, how old his children really are, what the world looks like now. If he does not wake up, the dream continues, which is perhaps the kinder outcome. The dream with its frozen family and its endless suburban evenings and its weekly crisis and its weekly reset, on until the biological processes that sustain the dream finally exhaust themselves. Under the radiation theory, the loop eventually produces a body that cannot continue, no matter how thoroughly the power plant has altered the cellular mechanics. Even adapted biology has limits. Even Homer's extraordinary resilience against physical damage does not make him genuinely immortal. The radiation bought him decades of strange survival. It did not buy him forever. Under the coma theory combined with the radiation theory, Homer's dreaming body in its Springfield hospital bed is also being affected by whatever Springfield's contaminated water supply is doing to him, even as he lies there unconscious. The dream becomes more surreal as the neural architecture degrades, which is exactly what the show has been doing for 36 years. The early seasons, grounded in domestic realism. The later seasons, loose and strange and occasionally incoherent, as though the signal is degrading, as though the dreamer's hold on the simulation is becoming less precise. The show in 2025 is a different show from the show in 1993. Not worse, not better, just different. More surreal, less grounded. More willing to abandon the rules of its own reality for a joke or a guest appearance or a plot that would have felt out of place in the show's earlier seasons. This is usually attributed to the natural loosening of any show that runs long enough, the difficulty of maintaining creative standards across 36 years of production. The coma theory has a different explanation. The dreamer is getting tired. The mind is still running the simulation, still producing the family, still placing Homer on the couch every week with Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie, but the maintenance of realistic detail is becoming harder. The dream is getting dreamier. The physics are getting looser. The internal consistency is getting harder to sustain. And still Homer is there, still on the couch, still reaching for the remote. Still one episode from another disaster and another recovery and another week of trying, imperfectly and wholeheartedly, to be the man his family needs him to be. The last Homer theory is not a theory about how the show ends. It is a theory about why we keep watching. We keep watching because Homer is still trying. Because the loop, however artificial, however maintained by the specific mechanics of television production and floating timelines and radiation-altered biology and dreaming minds and collective denial, contains something real. The trying is real. The love is real. The fear is real. The reaching toward connection with both hands open is real. We recognize it because we do it too. We all do it. We all sit on our own version of the couch, in our own version of Springfield, surrounded by our own version of the family, trying to hold together the specific texture of our lives against the entropy that keeps pushing in from outside. We all face our own version of burns, the forces that shaped us before we were old enough to resist them. We all carry our own version of the crayon, whatever has been in there since childhood, reducing something we might have been. We all love our own version of the people in the doorway, the sleeping children, the partner on the couch, with the specific quality of love that does not ask for anything because it is not that kind of love. Homer Simpson will not age, Bart will not turn 11, Lisa will not grow up, at least not in the regular continuity, not in the episodes that air every week and reset. The loop will keep floating. The clock will stay stopped at 1989, or at 1993, or at whatever moment the dream or the radiation or the denial or the billionaire's control chose as the moment to freeze. And we will keep watching. Not because the show tells us something we do not know, because it tells us something we already know in a way that makes it bearable. The thing we already know is this: families are hard, and parenthood is hard, and love is hard. And the gap between who we mean to be and who we are is vast and permanent and embarrassing, and we are going to get back up tomorrow and try again anyway, because the people on the couch are worth it. Homer Simpson has been getting back up and trying again for 36 years. He will keep doing it for however long the show runs. Not because the show will ever resolve his story into something tidy and earned, because resolution is not what this story is for. This story is for the trying, the getting back up, the donut and the couch and the family and the love that does not ask for anything because it is not that kind of love. That is the last Homer theory. Not a mystery, not a conspiracy, not a revelation that changes everything. Just the man himself, on the couch, in the house, in the town, reaching toward the people he loves with both hands open. That is Homer Simpson. That has always been Homer Simpson. And as long as Bart is 10 years old and the cooling towers are rising against the Springfield skyline, and Marge is sighing in that specific way that means she has already forgiven him before he even knows he needs forgiveness, Homer Simpson will be there. Exactly where he always is. Exactly where he has always been. Number extended. The early Homer continued. The town Homer grew up in was already doing things to its residents that none of them would ever fully name. This is worth sitting with for a moment before moving forward, because it is one of the stranger and more unsettling aspects of Homer's childhood when examined under the theories the show has been quietly building since its earliest seasons. He grew up in Springfield. Not the Springfield of later seasons, not the fully realized contamination zone that the radiation theory describes, but the Springfield that was becoming that place, in the years when the power plant was new enough that its effects had not yet accumulated to the point of obviousness. The plant was operating during Homer's childhood. Burns was already there, already making the decisions that would define Springfield's environmental and economic character for the decades to come. The water supply was already receiving whatever the plant was putting into it. The air was already carrying whatever the plant was releasing into it. And the children of Springfield, Homer among them, were already absorbing what their environment contained, because children absorb their environments with a completeness that adults, whose biological systems have stabilized around existing exposures, do not match. Whatever the plant did to Homer's biology happened gradually, across years of exposure that began before his frontal lobe had finished developing, before the neural architecture that would eventually define the adult Homer's cognitive profile had finished establishing itself. The crayon, lodged in the brain tissue, was one intervention. The environmental contamination was another, diffuse and ongoing, impossible to point to with the directness of a single foreign object, but no less present in its influence on the body and brain that were developing around it. Homer did not notice any of this. No child would. The environment he was growing up in was the only environment he had ever known, and the baseline of any childhood is experienced as simply the way things are, the texture of existence, the background against which everything else occurs. The water tasted the way it tasted, the air smelled the way it smelled, his brain processed the world the way his brain processed the world. He had nothing to compare any of it to. What Homer had instead, in the years of his Springfield childhood, was Abe. Abe, who was in some ways the most precisely positioned figure in Homer's early development for understanding how the damage compounds. Abe's own history with Springfield, his own exposure, his own relationship with the plant and with Burns and with the specific way the town's institutional power operated, had shaped him in ways that Homer would never have access to as explanation for who Abe was. He just had Abe as Abe was. And Abe as Abe was is one of the show's most carefully constructed portraits of a particular kind of father, loving in his intentions, absent in his expression, present in the house and systematically unavailable in the ways that mattered most. There is an episode in the later seasons where Abe tells Homer something that stops the scene. He says that he was not a good father. He says it without ceremony, without the construction of dramatic confession, in the specific flat register of someone stating a fact they have lived with long enough that the weight of the fact has become familiar. Homer's response is not to reassure him. Homer's response is silence, and then the specific kind of pivot that Homer performs when the emotional content of a moment exceeds what his processing can accommodate in real time. He moves on. He does not forgive Abe in the scene because forgiveness requires articulation, and articulation requires cognitive access that the moment does not provide. But he does not condemn either. He simply continues to exist in the same space as Abe, which is, for Homer, its own form of grace. The relationship between Homer and Abe across the show's full run is one of the more quietly sophisticated things it has produced. A father and son who love each other with the specific limitation of two people who share a wound that neither of them can see clearly enough to discuss directly, who orbit each other for decades without quite achieving the connection either of them wants, and who keep showing up anyway because the wanting itself is real, even when its satisfaction remains just out of reach. Homer's grandfather on the maternal side, which is to say Mona's family, is a presence that the show gestures toward without fully developing. What the show has established about Mona's background, gathered across the episodes that deal with her, is that she came from a family with some degree of social and political awareness, that her radicalization in the late 1960s was not a complete break from her values but an intensification of them, and that the person she was before the FBI pursuit was someone for whom engagement with the world beyond her immediate household was a natural orientation. Homer inherited this from her. Not the political form of it, because Homer's political engagement is, to put it generously, but the underlying orientation, the sense that the world beyond the immediate situation is worth paying attention to, that people beyond the people you already know matter, that connection extends outward from the family rather than stopping at its boundaries. This is the thing that makes Homer, for all his limitations, a person who reaches toward strangers and finds them interesting, who makes friends of people who are not obvious candidates for his friendship, who keeps extending himself into the world even after the world has given him repeated evidence that extension is often followed by a moderately catastrophic landing. He got this from Mona. Through the brief years of her presence, through whatever those years installed in him before she was gone, through the specific quality of a mother's love for a child that leaves its traces even when the mother herself cannot. The ghost of who Homer might have been without any of the redirections, without the crayon and without the environmental contamination and without Mona's absence and without Abe's emotional limitations, is not someone the show will ever show us. That person is permanently hypothetical, permanently in the space of what might have been, permanently out of reach. What we have instead is the actual Homer, shaped by every force that shaped him, carrying every damage that was done to him, and reaching anyway. The reaching is what makes the childhood worth understanding. Because understanding where the reaching comes from, the depth from which it comes, the distance it travels to arrive in the episodes where Homer reaches most completely, changes its quality from a character note to a survival story. Homer reaches from the very bottom of who he is, from a place that all the damage reached in and could not quite extinguish, from the specific place where Mona's love lived before Mona was gone, and where it has been living ever since. He does not know it is there. He cannot name it. He just reaches. Number extended. Homer's brain continued. The episode that reveals Smart Homer is important for one more reason that requires extended attention. What Smart Homer does with his intelligence in the days between the crayon's removal and its replacement is not primarily academic or analytical. It is emotional. Smart Homer writes a letter to Marge. We have discussed this, but the letter is only the most dramatic expression of a pattern that runs through all of Smart Homer's behavior in that episode. He uses his intelligence primarily to attend more carefully to the people he loves. He listens differently. He responds to emotional content with a precision that regular Homer cannot achieve because the cognitive processing required for that precision is not fully available to regular Homer. He notices what Marge is not saying alongside what she is saying, which is something regular Homer, for all his emotional warmth, cannot consistently do. This matters for understanding what the crayon cost Homer and what the cost means for how we read the show's entire emotional record. Regular Homer loves fully and attends imprecisely. Smart Homer loves fully and attends precisely. The quality and depth of the love does not change with the crayon's removal. What changes is Homer's capacity to express it in forms that Marge can fully receive. Forms that acknowledge not just his feeling but her specific reality, her specific self, what she needs rather than simply what he feels. The gap between these two modes of expression is where decades of a marriage happen. Marge has been receiving Homer's love in its imprecise form for their entire relationship. She has translated it, compensated for what was lost in translation, found the love inside the imprecision, and held on to it. She has been doing this for so long that the translation has become second nature, an automatic process she performs without awareness, the way you stop noticing the sound of traffic outside a window because you have lived with it long enough that it has joined the category of background conditions rather than events requiring attention. The letter, the precise and articulate and fully attending letter, breaks through the background. It is not the translation. It is the thing itself, in a form that requires no translation, that lands completely, that arrives as exactly what it is. Homer seeing Marge, all of Marge, and telling her what he sees. And then the crayon goes back in. Marge never receives another letter like it. She knows it is possible. She has held the paper in her hands and read the sentences and cried in the specific way that she cried, which was not grief but the release of something that had been held in tension long enough to produce pressure. She knows that Homer, the full Homer, the Homer underneath the fog, is capable of this. And then the fog comes back, and the translation returns, and she performs it again, every day, as she has always performed it. This is the most quietly devastating piece of the crayon episode. Not Homer's choice to replace the crayon, which is at least a choice Homer makes for understandable reasons. The consequence of that choice for Marge, which is that she has been shown what the marriage could look like, and then handed back the marriage as it is. She accepts this. She accepts Homer's choice. She accepts the return of the fog and the return of her role as translator. Why? The show offers the simplest and most complete answer it has. Because the fog is still Homer. The love is still there inside it. The letter was not a different person writing to her. It was the same person, finally with the tools to write the letter he has always been trying to write in the specific language of the life they have built together, the language that is imprecise and catastrophic, and full of donuts and strangling and falling asleep in front of the television and waking up to his hand reaching for hers in the dark, the letter was beautiful. The language of their actual life together is also beautiful, in the specific way that things that are real are beautiful, even when they are imperfect. She keeps both. The memory of the letter, the reality of the fog. She keeps both because she is Marge, and Marge has always been able to hold more than one true thing simultaneously without needing to choose between them. Homer does not remember writing the letter clearly after the crayon is replaced. The fog returns and takes most of the smart Homer days with it, leaving impressions rather than clear memories. The feeling of something that happened without the specific content of what it was. But Marge remembers every word. She always will. The intelligence that Homer has in the absence of the crayon is worth understanding precisely because the show is careful about not making it an unqualified good. Smart Homer is miserable in a way that regular Homer is not. This is sometimes read as the show suggesting that intelligence leads to misery, which is a less interesting and less honest reading than what the show is actually doing. The show is not making a general claim about intelligence. It is making a specific claim about Homer's intelligence in Homer's context. Smart Homer can see Springfield clearly. He can see what the town is, what has been done to it, what the plant is doing, what Burns has built, how the institutions of the town relate to each other and to the people living inside them. He can trace the causal chain from cause to effect with enough precision to understand not just that his life is difficult, but how the difficulty was constructed, who constructed it, and for what purposes. This understanding does not produce freedom. It produces the specific misery of seeing a trap clearly without having the tools to exit it. Because Smart Homer's intelligence is the intelligence of perception and analysis, which is not the same as the intelligence of action and transformation. Seeing the trap clearly does not unlock the door. It just means you spend your time in the trap acutely aware of its dimensions. Regular Homer cannot see the trap clearly. He moves through the trap with the casual ease of someone who does not know they are in one, who has adapted to the specific dimensions of the space so completely that the space has ceased to feel like a trap and becomes simply the shape of his life. He bumps into walls. He gets stuck in corners. He moves cheerfully through the parts that are not corners, eating the donuts that the trap has provided and watching the television that the trap has installed and loving the people who are in the trap with him. This is not tragic in the way that Smart Homer's clarity is tragic. It is a different register of tragic, quieter and more diffuse, and in some ways harder to hold in mind because it lacks the dramatic quality of someone who can see what is happening to them and cannot stop it. Regular Homer cannot see it and does not stop it and is not trying to stop it. He is just living. The show chose this for him. The writers chose this for him. Homer chose this for himself in the season 12 episode, knowing what he was choosing. And the audience chooses this for Homer every week by watching, by maintaining the loop, by staying in Springfield. Nobody leaves. That is the one true constant. In all the theories, across all the evidence, through every interpretation and every alternate reading, nobody leaves Springfield. The loop runs. Homer is still in it. Number extended. Homer and Marge continued. The near-infidelity episodes deserve specific attention in any extended discussion of the Homer-Marge marriage, not because they represent the marriage's failure, but because they are the moments when the marriage's actual strength becomes most legible. A marriage that has never been tested is not the same as a marriage that has been tested and held. Homer and Marge's has been tested. In multiple episodes, across multiple seasons, with varying levels of dramatic commitment and varying levels of comedic buffering, the show has brought each of them to the edge of the thing and watched them step back. The Marge Jock episode from the first season is the foundational text for this dimension of the show. Marge takes up bowling. A handsome bowling instructor pays attention to her, the specific kind of attention that Marge does not regularly receive. Attention to Marge as a person who has desires and preferences and an inner life, rather than attention to Marge as the household she manages or the family she maintains. He notices her, not the role, her. The episode handles this with more care than the premise seems to require of a first-season animated comedy. Marge's response to being noticed in this way is not simple flirtation. It is the response of someone who has been living in a marriage that provides many things she values, and that has not consistently provided this particular thing, being seen. She is seen at home. She is loved at home. but the specific quality of being found interesting and desirable and worth pursuing by someone who has no obligation to find her any of those things, who is finding her those things freely and voluntarily, is a different quality from the love that exists because it has always existed. She does not pursue it to its conclusion. The episode builds toward the decision point, and she chooses Homer, chooses the mess and the imprecision and the love that has been there longer than she can remember choosing it, over the attention that is flattering but has no foundation and no history. She chooses the real thing over the appealing thing. The choice is made and the show honors it, without making Homer's obliviousness to the whole situation into more of a joke than it already is. What the episode reveals about the marriage is that Marge's choice is not made from resignation or from an inability to imagine alternatives. It is made from knowledge. She knows Homer. She knows exactly what she is choosing when she chooses him. And she chooses him anyway, not despite knowing him fully but because of it. The full knowledge of the person and the continued choice of the person despite the full knowledge. That is not settling. That is the specific quality of love that takes longest to develop and that runs deepest when it does. The Homer-Mindy episode from Season 5 tests from the other direction and tests it more acutely in some ways, because Mindy is not simply someone who pays Homer the kind of attention that is easy to receive. She is someone who is, on the surface, almost identical to Homer in temperament and preferences, which produces the specific disorientation of encountering someone who seems to understand you completely without effort, whose company requires none of the translation that any long relationship eventually requires. Homer does not pursue it to its conclusion either. His fidelity is not presented as easy or uncomplicated or the automatic product of virtue. The episode stages it as a genuine contest, with Homer's desire and Homer's love running in opposite directions for the length of the episode before the love wins. The love wins not through argument or moral suasion, but through the simple persistence of its reality. Marge is what Homer actually wants, at the deepest level where want is organized, and that want is not something that a more comfortable or more initially legible alternative can dislodge. These episodes matter not as cautionary tales but as evidence. Evidence that the marriage is real, that it has been tested against genuine alternatives and held, that what Homer and Marge have built together is not simply the product of inertia or the absence of other options, but of repeated choosing. They keep choosing each other, not with the romantic ease that stories about love prefer to depict, but with the messy and complicated and sometimes failing and always renewing quality of two people who are committed not just to the marriage in the abstract, but to this specific person, this specific mess, this specific life. That is a hard thing to depict in an episodic format that requires the reset button and that cannot allow consequences to accumulate across episodes in the way that real relationship consequences accumulate. The show has found a way to depict it anyway, through the pattern of the choosing, through the accumulated weight of episodes that each demonstrate the same underlying truth from a slightly different angle. They keep choosing each other. After 36 years, the choosing is still happening. That is the answer to every question the theories raise about whether this marriage could possibly work. Number extended, Homer's jobs continued. The jobs that reveal the most about Homer's relationship with identity, rather than with work as such, are the ones the show handles most carefully. The positions where Homer discovers, temporarily, that he is good at something, and that being good at something feels different from simply surviving something. The food critic arc is the clearest example. Homer's qualifications for the position are, as with most of his positions, conventional credentials 0. What he has instead is a relationship with food so complete and so non-performative that it functions as expertise of a different kind. He is not analyzing food strategically, not calibrating his responses to the expectations of the genre, not writing from a position of constructed authority. He is simply experiencing food completely and then describing what the experience was, in language that has the specific freshness of someone who has no investment in seeming sophisticated, and therefore no reason to moderate his actual response. This produces criticism that restaurant critics with conventional credentials do not typically produce. The criticism is honest in the way that only uncalibrated responses can be honest. It tells the reader what the food actually tasted like to someone who was paying full attention, rather than what the food ought to taste like given its pedigree or price point or the reputation of the chef producing it. This is, it turns out, exactly what the genre needs from someone who has no investment in the social architecture of the restaurant world. The position collapses not because Homer turns out to be wrong about food, but because the restaurant world is not interested in the kind of honesty Homer produces. The social architecture, the relationships between critics and restaurants, the mutual dependencies and the implicit agreements about what criticism does and does not say, these require a kind of self-conscious calibration that Homer cannot perform. He says what he thinks. The restaurant world needs critics who say something more managed than what they think, and Homer's inability to manage his output makes him, in the long run, incompatible with the professional structure of the role. But for the duration of the episodes, the criticism is good. Genuinely good, in the way that things are genuinely good when they are produced by someone who actually cares about the thing itself, rather than about what producing the thing signals. Homer cares about food. He has always cared about food. His relationship with eating is one of the most consistently depicted aspects of his character, and it is consistently depicted as genuine rather than as appetite for its own sake. He notices things about food. He has preferences that are his, and not borrowed from a social consensus about what preferences indicate taste. He is, in the specific context of food criticism, operating from a real and developed relationship with his subject matter. The astronaut job, which the show handles in a single extended episode, and which stands as one of the more formally ambitious things the show attempted in its middle seasons, reveals something different about Homer's relationship with aspiration. The degree to which his aspirations are not about status or recognition in the conventional sense, but about experience. Homer goes to space not to be the kind of person who has been to space. He goes because the idea of being in space, the actual sensory experience of it, is something he cannot not want. The wanting is direct and unmediated by any consideration of what going to space means or signals or accomplishes in social terms. He goes. The experience is everything he wanted, and also more frightening and more physically demanding and more lonely than any of the imaginings that the wanting was built from. And he does something in space that is characteristic and revealing. He brings a bag of potato chips. He smuggles recreational food onto a spacecraft because being in space does not mean he stops being Homer. The potato chip scene, where Homer opens the bag and the chips fill the zero-gravity cabin and he attempts to eat them all before they damage the instrumentation, is the show's clearest statement about the relationship between aspiration and identity. He wanted to go to space. He went to space. He remained entirely himself while in space. This is not failure. The show treats it as comedy, and it is comedy, but it is also a form of fidelity to self that most people, in the most extraordinary circumstances of their lives, do not maintain. Homer in space is the same Homer who is on the couch. The couch relocated to the cosmos, but the Homer is identical. The sanitation commissioner job is perhaps the most revealing about what Homer's leadership quality can produce when the institutional context does not immediately defeat it. He runs on a platform of actual improvement, better trash pickup, cleaner streets, the genuine civic enhancement that his community has been asking for without receiving. He wins. He delivers. For a period that the show depicts with genuine pleasure, Homer is effective in public office. Springfield is cleaner. The people are happier. The community briefly functions better because Homer, with his specific combination of total commitment and zero political calculation, has been put in charge of the specific domain where total commitment and zero political calculation happen to be the most useful inputs. Then he overshoots. The overcorrection that is Homer's professional signature arrives, and the job collapses in the way that Homer's jobs collapse. Not because the underlying capacity was absent, but because the capacity cannot be sustained through the institutional management that professional positions require over time. He is good at the task. He is not good at the apparatus that surrounds the task. This is the consistent Homer professional story. The capacity is real. The apparatus defeats the capacity. The plant is always there when the apparatus wins. Number extended. Homer and God continued. The specific question that the Homer-God relationship raises, beyond the comedy of its asymmetry with Ned's carefully maintained devotional life, is about what kind of relationship with the divine is actually productive within the show's established universe. The show has a God who is real. This is canonically established. God appears in Homer the heretic and speaks to Homer in a manner consistent with the theological traditions that regard divine encounters as direct, personal, and communicative. God has opinions. God has humor. God, in the episode's specific depiction, is interested in Homer in a way that is not general or impersonal, but particular to Homer's situation, responsive to the questions Homer is actually asking rather than to the questions Homer is supposed to be asking. The interest is reciprocal. Homer is interested in God in the way that Homer is interested in everything, completely and without agenda. He is not trying to use the divine encounter for strategic purposes. He is not attempting to establish a formal relationship with specific terms. He is simply there, in the dream, in the conversation, fully present with whatever is happening, which is what Homer is always doing and which appears to be, within the show's divine-human interface, exactly the quality that the connection requires. Ned's devotional life is organized around a specific theological framework that includes a well-developed concept of what the divine is and how one appropriately relates to it. This framework is not wrong in any sense the show endorses. The show respects Ned's faith without mocking its content. But the framework has become a kind of mediation, a carefully maintained structure that Ned works within, performing his devotion in accordance with the specific requirements that the framework establishes. The performing is the problem, not the insincerity of it, because Ned's devotion is entirely sincere. The performing is the problem because it introduces a self-consciousness into the relationship that is not present in Homer's encounters with the divine. Ned knows he is praying when he prays. He knows what prayer is supposed to look like. He maintains his comportment throughout in accordance with that knowledge. The prayer is always the prayer of someone who is aware of being a person in the act of prayer. Homer, when he reaches toward God, is not aware of being a person in the act of prayer. He is just reaching. The distinction is everything. The self-consciousness that Ned's framework creates is not dishonesty. It is simply the introduction of a second-order awareness, an awareness of the self in relation to the act that the first-order contact the show depicts requires the absence of. Homer is constitutionally incapable of second-order self-awareness in most contexts. He cannot observe himself performing an action because the observation requires a cognitive apparatus for self-monitoring that the crayon and the environmental damage have not left fully intact. He simply does the thing. And when the thing is reaching toward the divine, the simply doing the thing without the mediation of performance or framework produces the specific quality of encounter that the show depicts. God talks to Homer not because Homer is better than Ned or more deserving of divine attention. God talks to Homer because Homer, when he talks to God, is actually there in the conversation in the way that the conversation requires. Ned is there in the performance of the conversation. Homer is just there. This is the show's most theologically interesting observation, and it is made without any explicit theological framing, without ever claiming to know what prayer is, or what God is, or whether divine encounters are real. It is simply a depiction of two different qualities of relating to something beyond oneself, and the observation that one of them produces contact and the other produces form. The form is not nothing. Ned's faith sustains him through losses that would devastate anyone without any framework at all. Maud's death, the house collapse, the accumulated weight of living next to Homer Simpson for 36 years. Ned's faith framework provides him with resources for processing these experiences that Homer, who has no framework, cannot access. The framework has real value. The show is not dismissing it. But the contact is different from the framework, and Homer has the contact. Number extended. Homer as a father continued. The moments when Homer's fathering succeeds in ways that his conventional limitations should prevent are worth cataloging carefully because they are the moments that reveal what the doorway theory is pointing toward most precisely. The relationship with Lisa over the saxophone is the clearest example. Homer hates the saxophone. He has always found the sound of it difficult in the specific way that a man without particular musical sensitivity finds the sound of a practiced instrument played daily in a small house difficult. He has complained about it. He has clearly wished, in the ways that Homer's interior life is legible through his exterior behavior, that the instrument had never entered the household. And then there is the episode where he finds the saxophone, or where the saxophone is at risk, or where Lisa's music is threatened, and the episode turns. The turn always surprises the same way. Homer, who genuinely dislikes the sound of the saxophone, is willing to do significant things to ensure that Lisa keeps playing it. Not because he has changed his relationship with the sound, because his relationship with Lisa playing the sound is entirely different from his relationship with the sound itself. The sound, without Lisa attached to it, is an irritant. The sound with Lisa attached to it is Lisa, doing the thing that is most Lisa, expressing the part of herself that the rest of her life has very few outlets for. When Homer protects the saxophone, he is not protecting music. He is protecting the specific channel through which his daughter is most completely herself, the one consistent space in her life where who she is does not need to be justified or explained or defended against the incomprehension of the people around her. He is protecting Lisa's access to herself. He understands this without being able to articulate it. His protective response to anything that threatens Lisa's relationship with music is not reasoned through. It is prior to reason. It is the kind of knowing that lives in the body, the parental knowing that operates below the level of thought and that is, in Homer's case, possibly more reliable than his thought because it does not pass through the cognitive bottleneck that the crayon has created. Homer knows things about his children that he cannot explain knowing. He knows when Bart is in genuine trouble versus performing trouble, and the distinction matters enormously in how he responds to it. He knows when Lisa's sadness is the sustainable sadness of a sensitive child in an insensitive world versus the kind of sadness that requires intervention. He knows when Maggie needs to be picked up, in the physical and emotional sense, regardless of whether she has communicated this need in any form he could consciously register. This knowing is the gift his specific configuration of intelligence gives him. The analytical intelligence that the crayon reduced was never the only kind of intelligence running. The emotional attunement, the parental knowing, the specific sensitivity to the interior states of the people he loves, this was never located in the frontal lobe that the crayon damaged. It was somewhere else, somewhere the crayon did not reach, somewhere that has been functioning at full capacity since before Homer was old enough to have any other cognitive capacity at all. The Maggie relationship is the most purely protective dimension of Homer's fathering, and it is the dimension where his parenting is least compromised by the gap between intention and execution, because the things Maggie needs from him are the things Homer can give without the executive function that the crayon removed. She needs to be held. She needs to be in the presence of someone who is glad she exists. She needs the specific quality of unconditional warmth that Homer produces in the people he loves without effort, because effort is not what produces it in Homer. It is simply present. Homer with Maggie is Homer at the most uncomplicated version of his parenting self. The complications that enter with Bart, the mirror dynamics and the shared temperament and the specific friction of too much similarity, are absent with Maggie. The complications that enter with Lisa, the gap between their cognitive operating levels and the specific grief of not being able to meet her where she most needs to be met, are absent with Maggie in a different way. With Maggie, Homer can simply be present. And simply being present in the specific full-weight way that Homer is present is exactly what Maggie needs. The show has staged this understanding visually across its run through the specific image of Homer holding Maggie. The image appears in many contexts: comic, tender, incidental, dramatic. But the quality of Homer's physical presence with Maggie in these images is consistent regardless of the context. He holds her with the specific quality of someone who is holding something they cannot protect adequately through any other means, and who therefore protects it through simple presence, through being the body that is between the small body and the world, through the oldest form of parental protection that exists. Maggie is the smallest version of his hope for the future. She is the child who has had the least damage done by Springfield and by life because she has had the least life yet in which damage could accumulate. Whatever she is going to become, whoever she is going to be, she is not yet fully formed. The forming is still happening. And Homer's presence in the forming is simple and total. He is glad she is there. He will be glad she is there forever. That gladness is the thing he can give her that matters most. Number extended. Homer's body continued. The yellow skin is so familiar, so completely normalized by decades of viewing, that it is worth stopping to consider what it actually represents within the show's internal logic. Every resident of Springfield has yellow skin, not the saturated golden yellow of a specific ethnic presentation, not the jaundiced yellow of a liver condition, but the specific flat cartoon yellow that the show uses as its universal human pigmentation within Springfield's borders. The show's standard explanation, offered by the art department and confirmed by the creators in various interviews, is that the yellow was chosen for practical reasons. It reads distinctively on screen, separates the characters from the white backgrounds of early television production, and became so identified with the show that changing it became unthinkable. This explanation is true on the production side. Within the show's fiction, the yellow has no explanation that is offered or accepted by any character. It is simply how Springfield's residents look. Nobody in Springfield remarks on it. Nobody from outside Springfield remarks on it in the ways that someone encountering a population with atypical pigmentation would remark on it in reality. The yellow exists in the show's logic as unremarkable background, the baseline appearance of the people who live here. The radiation theory changes this. If the Springfield power plant has been contaminating the town's environment for decades, producing demonstrable effects on the biology of residents, including the three-eyed fish and the four-fingered hands and the specific constellation of physical anomalies that cluster in Springfield's population, then the yellow skin is another data point in the same pattern. Not an art style choice in the world of the show, a population-level biological marker of prolonged invasion. This is the detail that makes the radiation theory feel most complete when you sit with it. The yellow is everywhere, not just Homer. Not just the nuclear plant workers or the people who live closest to the cooling towers. Every Springfield resident, from the oldest to the youngest, from the richest to the poorest, from those who work directly with the plant to those who have no direct relationship with it at all. The contamination is total. The marker is universal. Nobody escapes the yellow because nobody escapes the water. Nobody escapes the air. Nobody escapes what has been put into the environment of a town that has been living next to a leaking reactor with 342 violations for longer than most of its residents have been alive. The outside visitors are the confirmation. When celebrities come to Springfield, when characters arrive from beyond the town's boundaries, they look different. Not in a way the show flags as significant, not in a way any character comments on, but in a way that is visible if you are looking for it. The outsiders have different proportions, different skin tones, different features that are subtly but consistently distinguishable from the Springfield baseline. The show's art style adjusts for visitors in a way that creates a visible distinction between the people who live inside the contamination zone and the people who do not. Homer's body within this reading is not an anomaly. It is the most concentrated version of what Springfield's environment has done to everyone. His position inside the plant gives him a higher dose of whatever the plant produces. His decades of occupational exposure have compounded what the population-level environmental exposure has done. He is, in a sense, the most completely Springfield resident in existence. He has been receiving what Springfield offers in the most direct and most sustained form available, and his body carries the evidence of this with a completeness that is both comedic and, if you choose to look at it without the comedic frame, genuinely disturbing. He falls down and gets back up. He absorbs the car and the bullet and the fall and the electrocution and keeps functioning. His healing is the adaptation the radiation theory describes. A body that has been operating in a high-damage environment for so long that the mechanisms for handling damage have become the body's primary organizational priority. This is not invulnerability. It is specialized resilience, the specific resilience of a system that has been hit so many times that hitting has become the operating condition rather than the exception. He is also, under this reading, sicker than anyone on the show acknowledges. Not in the dramatic medical crisis sense, but in the sustained, chronic way that people who are exposed to long-term environmental damage are sick. In the background, in the cellular processes, in the body's ongoing attempt to manage what it is receiving. The comedy of Homer's physical resilience is the surface of a story about what 3 decades in a leaking nuclear plant does to a human body. The show never says this directly. It shows you the three-eyed fish. It shows you the safety violations. It shows you the crayon in the frontal lobe. It shows you Homer falling down and getting back up, over and over, across hundreds of episodes. It provides every piece of the picture and then presents the picture as cartoon comedy, which it is, and also as evidence, which it also is. Number extended. Homer's fears continued. The fear of public failure deserves specific attention because it manifests in a way that is surprising given Homer's general relationship with dignity. Homer has very little investment in appearing competent or composed in front of strangers. He says embarrassing things without embarrassment. He does embarrassing things without appearing to experience the standard social pain that embarrassing behavior typically produces in people who are monitoring their own social presentation. This is sometimes read as Homer having no shame, which is not quite right. Homer has shame, but his shame is organized around specific people and specific contexts in a way that is not the standard social shame of someone concerned with their general reputation. Homer does not care what most people think of him. He cares. with an intensity that approaches the pathological, what a specific small group of people thinks of him: Marge, his children, and the people who constitute his closest community. The public failure fear is not about strangers seeing him fail. It is about failing in front of the people whose opinion is organized around his worth rather than around his performance. He can fail in front of everyone and not experience it as shame because everyone does not matter in the specific way that Marge matters, that Bart and Lisa matter. But when he fails in front of Marge, the shame is total because the failure is not just a performance failure. It is evidence for the foundational lesson that he is not enough, that the person who sees him most completely might eventually see this as the truth. He manages this fear through the specific psychological mechanism that Homer uses for all his deepest fears. He does not manage it. He does not have a management strategy. He simply experiences the fear and continues to behave in the way he behaves, which means that the fear coexists with the behavior rather than stopping the behavior, that he will do the embarrassing thing in front of Marge and experience the shame of it, and try again tomorrow and do another embarrassing thing and experience the shame of that too. This is a form of courage, not the dramatic courage of someone who confronts their fears strategically and overcomes them through deliberate effort. The more ordinary and perhaps more difficult courage of someone who is genuinely afraid and keeps showing up anyway, who does not have a method for resolving the fear and therefore simply carries the fear alongside the behavior that produces it indefinitely without expectation of resolution. The show has depicted Homer's shame specifically in the moments where Marge is disappointed. Not angry at Homer, though she is often that too, but disappointed in the specific way that indicates the gap between what she hoped and what the situation produced. Homer's response to Marge's disappointment is the closest he gets to experiencing the foundational fear in its full articulated form. The look on his face in those moments, the specific register of it, which is not the standard cartoon embarrassment but something with more weight in it, more history, suggests the depth from which his response is coming. He is experiencing not just the disappointment of this moment, but the echoed confirmation of the lesson. I am the kind of person who disappoints the people who matter most to me. The lesson is wrong. He knows it is wrong in some inarticulate place below the conscious registration of the fear. But the knowing does not stop the experiencing. What stops the experiencing, what interrupts the loop of the fear every time, is Marge. Not Marge's forgiveness, though she offers that. Marge's continued presence. The morning after the disappointment where she is still there, still making coffee, still the specific texture of her presence that has been the ambient condition of Homer's adult life. That continued presence is the refutation, not the argument against the foundational lesson, but the simple ongoing evidence that the lesson is wrong, delivered daily, without ceremony, in the form of a woman who is still there. He needs that evidence every day. He will need it every day for as long as he is Homer. That is not a pathology. That is the specific shape of a wound that does not heal, but that is tended to, continuously and with love, by the person who chose to be the one doing the tending. Number extended. Homer's dreams continued. The escalation of surrealism across the show's run, tracked carefully against the coma theory's proposed timeline, produces a pattern that is genuinely difficult to explain through any framework, except the one the coma theory offers. Season 1 through 3. Grounded premises, recognizable domestic situations, the kind of comedic exaggeration that falls within the range of heightened realism. The situations are improbable, but they are improbable in the way that sitcom situations are improbable, which is to say they are organized versions of situations that real families actually encounter. Homer tries to get a promotion. The family adopts a dog. Bart gets in trouble at school in ways that require resolution. The show is set in a specific, recognizable world, and it moves through that world with the specific gravity of a world that has rules. Season 4. Homer goes to space. Homer is recruited into a secret society. The premises are escalating. The show's relationship with its own internal physics is becoming looser. The world is still recognizable, but the events in it are starting to reach beyond the plausible in ways that feel qualitatively different from the earlier season's heightened realism. Season 5 and beyond. Homer meets presidents. Homer travels internationally with a regularity that the economic reality of his life cannot support. The celebrity guest appearances multiply and diversify. The premises drift further from the grounded domestic situations of the early seasons and into a territory where the improbability has become the operating mode rather than the exception. The coma theory's explanation for this is the most internally coherent one available. The dream is degrading. The dreaming mind that is producing the simulation of Springfield is doing what minds in extended comatose states are presumed to do when they have been running a single sustained dream for years. It loses precision. The specific constraints of reality that the early seasons maintained, the specific rules of the world that the simulation was organized around, relax as the simulation continues. The rules become suggestions. The improbable becomes common. The extraordinary becomes routine. This is consistent with what actually happens to dreams over the course of a night's sleep. The early dreams, which occur during the initial sleep cycles, tend to be more organized and more closely related to recent waking experience. The later dreams, occurring deeper into the sleep, tend toward the stranger and more surreal territory that is less constrained by the organizing logic of waking reality. If the coma dream has been running for decades rather than hours, the same pattern extended across a much longer timeline would predict exactly the escalation the show depicts. Homer in the early coma dream is Homer in his kitchen, Homer in his car, Homer at the plant. The situations are specific and grounded. The dream has good access to the reference material, the specific textures of Homer's pre-coma daily life, which provide the simulation with the detail it needs to maintain coherence. As the coma continues, as the brain sustaining the dream loses function, the specific textures degrade. The kitchen is still there, but the kitchen is in a different house. The plant is still there, but the plant is doing things that plants do not do. Burns is still there, but Burns is doing things that require a level of narrative creativity that the early coma dream did not need to produce. The simulation reaches for its reference material and finds the reference material wearing thin and fills the gaps with the other material available to it. The ambient sounds of the hospital room, the voices at the bedside, the fragments of external media that reach Homer's unconscious through whatever degree of sensory awareness his condition allows. This is where the celebrities come from. Not from Springfield becoming a famous person destination, but from Homer's comatose mind, processing the ambient media of the hospital room and incorporating names and voices and fragments of cultural presence into the dream's cast of characters. The celebrity is a voice Homer heard, translated by the dreaming brain into a person who shows up in Springfield and has an adventure with the family. The dream does not distinguish clearly between the people who have been in Springfield for 36 years and the people who arrived in the dream through the hospital television. All of them are equally real within the simulation, which is the specific quality of dreams. They do not tag their contents with origins. Everything in the dream is present tense, happening now, real in the way that everything in dreams is real while the dream is running. Homer cannot tell the difference. That is the condition of dreaming. The difference is invisible from inside. Number extended. Homer and Burns continued. The deal between Burns and Abe Simpson is the most structurally significant piece of the Homer-Burns relationship that exists in the show's canon, and it is the piece that receives the least extended analysis in popular discussions of the show, possibly because the episode that reveals it arrives relatively quietly rather than as a dramatic centerpiece, and possibly because the implications of the deal are so extensive that acknowledging them fully requires acknowledging a level of systemic premeditation in Homer's suffering that is uncomfortable to sit with. Burns committed something. The show is not fully explicit about what, deploying the characteristic Springfield approach of giving you enough to understand the significance without giving you every detail of the content. What is clear is that Abe discovered it. That what Abe discovered gave him leverage over Burns, that Burns chose to manage rather than dispute, and that the price of Abe's silence was Homer's job security. The job security, specified as covering any and all professional failures Homer might produce, is effectively an unconditional guarantee of Homer's continued employment at the plant, regardless of his performance. 742 documented errors, the show's canon specifies, and Homer was never permanently dismissed. The guarantee held through all of it. Incompetence that would have gotten anyone else fired within a week did not result in Homer's dismissal, because Burns's deal with Abe was more important to Burns than whatever specific damage Homer's incompetence was producing. This arrangement is the foundational irony of Homer's professional life. The job he returns to after every other job, the fixed point of his career, the baseline employment that defines his adult identity, was secured not through any capacity of Homer's own, but through a deal between his father and his employer that Homer has never been told about. He thinks he has a job because he keeps his job. He has a job because his grandfather made an arrangement. The employment that Homer has spent his adult life relating to as the one thing he can reliably return to was never contingent on him at all. Burns knows this. Abe knows this. Homer does not know this. And the not knowing is itself a piece of the control. Homer cannot understand the true nature of his relationship with his employer because he does not have access to the terms of the relationship's actual founding document. He cannot assess his own position accurately because the information required for accurate assessment has been withheld from him by the two people who possessed it. The conspiracy reading of the Homer-Burns relationship, fully extended, proposes that essentially nothing in Homer's adult professional life is the product of his own agency in the conventional sense. The plant was always going to employ him. The crayon was always going to limit his cognizance of what the plant was doing. The environmental contamination was always going to compound the crayon's effect. And Burns was always going to be there at the center of it, not watching Homer specifically, not targeting Homer in any personal sense, simply being the force that organized the conditions into which Homer was born and through which Homer has been living. Homer is not Burns's victim in the dramatic sense that requires villainous intent and personal targeting. He is the residue of Burns's operations, the specific individual who happens to occupy the space that Burns's choices have shaped into the specific form it takes. The space was not shaped for Homer. Homer just happens to be in the space. This is more disturbing than deliberate targeting would be. Deliberate targeting at least implies that Homer is significant enough to be the object of specific attention. What the conspiracy reading proposes is that Homer is collateral, that the forces that shaped his life were not organized around him but around the interests of a man who does not remember his name, and that the specific Homer that exists is the product of forces that were indifferent to him specifically while being entirely determinative of him collectively. Burns will never know the full extent of what his indifference produced. He will never understand that the man whose name he cannot remember is the man whose life he has most thoroughly shaped. He will never connect the dots because the dots, from Burns's position, are not a coherent picture of anything. They are simply the background operations of a century of power. Things done, deals made, decisions taken, none of which had Homer specifically in view, but all of which had Homer specifically as their consequence. Number, extended. The last Homer theory continued. The final question the show raises, which it will never answer because the show cannot end on an answer, is what happens when Homer is ready. Not what happens when the show ends, when the production decisions and the ratings and the contracts finally align to produce a finale. What happens in the fictional universe when Homer, the Homer who has been dreaming or not dreaming for 36 years, reaches the place where the loop is ready to break? The loop will break. Everything that runs toward an ending. Even the things that seem designed to run forever. Even the loops that have been maintained by the combined investment of millions of viewers and decades of production. The loop will break because that is what loops do when enough time has passed. What is on the other side? The coma theory's answer is the most emotionally direct. On the other side of the loop is Homer waking up, opening his eyes in the hospital bed after however many years have passed, finding out what time it is, looking for the faces that are supposed to be there, not knowing whether the faces will be there. This is the most frightening version of the ending because it requires Homer to find out the truth that the dream has been protecting him from. That time passed while he was sleeping, that the children grew up, that the specific configuration of people and moments and ordinary evenings that the dream has been preserving in amber has not actually been preserved in that form, but has continued, without him, into whatever it became. The truth might be bearable. Marge might still be there. The children might have grown into people who are recognizably the people the dream made them. The house might still exist in something like the form the dream maintained. The truth might be, not the dream, but something real and present and livable. Or the truth might not be bearable. The time that passed might have been too much time. The people who were supposed to be there might not be there in the forms the dream prepared him for. The specific life he has been dreaming might be so far in the past that the waking world has no room for it. Homer cannot know which of these he is waking up to until he wakes up. This is why the dream is still running. This is why the loop has been maintained. Because the alternative, the waking, requires facing an uncertainty that Homer's deepest fear cannot accommodate. The foundational fear, the fear of being left, the fear of waking up to an absence, is at its most extreme in the moment of waking from a coma. He might wake up and find that everyone who was supposed to be there is still there. He might wake up to an empty room. The dream is safer than the truth. The dream keeps everyone at their proper ages, at their proper distances, in their proper places. Marge is always there. The children are always the ages they were when he went under. The house is always on Evergreen Terrace. Nothing is lost because the dream cannot accommodate loss. Every loss that occurs in the dream is undone by the reset button, by the logic of the loop, by the structure of a story that requires continuation. Homer stays in the dream because the dream is the version of his family that he can control. The dream will not lose anyone. The dream will not allow the children to grow up without him. The dream will not let Marge stop choosing him. The dream is the permanent version of the specific thing he most needs. Waking up means risking all of it. The show understood this from the beginning. The show has been living in this understanding for 36 years, never quite stating it, never quite confronting it directly, keeping it in the peripheral vision of every episode so that it is always there but never quite the thing you are looking at directly. The tragedy and the love story and the comedy and the theories are all organized around this single, vulnerable center. A man who is keeping the dream alive because the dream is the thing he loves most, and letting the dream end means finding out whether the thing he loves most survived the time that passed while he was sleeping. So the loop runs. Homer is on the couch, the television is on, the family is there, the donuts are on the counter. Marge is in the kitchen. Bart is doing something he should not be doing. Lisa is playing the saxophone. Maggie is watching everything and saying nothing, holding behind her eyes the accumulated intelligence of 36 years of silent observation. And somewhere, in a hospital in Springfield that appears on no map, a man is lying very still. He is dreaming of his family. He is not ready to wake up yet. He may never be ready to wake up. The loop runs because he needs it to run. Because we need it to run. Because the specific version of the American family that the loop preserves is the version that was always too good to be temporary and too fragile to survive being permanent, and the dream is the only place where it can be both at once. Homer loves his family. He has always loved his family. He will keep dreaming for as long as the love needs a place to live. That is the last Homer theory. Not a theory about who shot Burns or whether the radiation explains the four fingers or what the floating timeline means in narrative terms. The last theory is the simplest one. He loves them. He is dreaming about them. He cannot stop. Number, supplemental. Springfield as a character, the town that shapes Homer. There is a sense in which every theory in this video is really a theory about Springfield rather than about Homer, and the two cannot be cleanly separated. Homer's psychology is the product of Springfield, as much as it is the product of the specific events of his personal history. Because Springfield is the container within which every personal event took place, the medium through which every force that shaped him was transmitted. The town and the man are not separable. What was done to Springfield was done to Homer. And what was done to Homer is legible in Springfield, and neither can be understood fully without the other. Springfield is the most analyzed fictional town in television history. More theory has been built around its geography, its institutions, its population, and its internal logic than around any comparable fictional location in any medium. This is partly a function of the show's duration. A town that has been depicted across 36 years and 788 episodes gives theory builders more raw material than any other fictional setting. But it is also a function of the show's specific quality of attention. Springfield has been observed with a precision and a consistency that transforms the town from background into foreground, from setting into subject. The town is organized around a contradiction that it has never attempted to resolve. It is a community in the full sense of the word, a place where people know each other and depend on each other and show up for each other in the specific ways that communities develop over time, and it is also a place that is quietly hostile to the well-being of the people who live inside it, in ways that are structural and ongoing, and that the community itself is not capable of confronting. The power plant is the most obvious expression of this contradiction. The plant provides Springfield's electricity. The plant employs a significant portion of Springfield's population. The plant, and Burns's management of it, is one of the primary economic engines around which the town's material life is organized. And the plant is poisoning the town. It has been poisoning the town for decades. The fish have 3 eyes. The cooling towers are cracked. The safety inspector is Homer. The 342 violations were discovered and not remediated because remediation was less important to the owner than continuation. Springfield cannot confront this contradiction, because confronting it would require confronting the degree to which the town's survival depends on the thing that is destroying it. The plant is too integrated into Springfield's economic and social reality to be challenged without threatening the economic and social reality itself. So the town accommodates the contradiction. It normalizes the three-eyed fish. It looks away from the cooling towers. It finds Homer's presence at the safety console charming rather than alarming. It develops, collectively and over time, the specific kind of willful not noticing that communities develop when the things most worth noticing are also the things most dangerous to acknowledge. Homer lives inside this accommodation. He is one of its primary beneficiaries, in the sense that his employment is secure, and one of its primary victims, in the sense that the employment is doing to him what it is doing. He accommodates the accommodation without knowing that he is accommodating it, which is the most complete form of accommodation available. He is not suppressing his awareness of what the plant is. He genuinely does not have access to that awareness, because the plant's effects include the cognitive impairment that would be required to develop it. The town and Homer are in the same loop in this respect. Springfield cannot see what the plant is doing because the plant has compromised the faculties that would allow the seeing. Homer cannot see what the plant is doing to him because the plant has compromised the faculties that would allow that seeing too. The contamination has produced the incapacity for perceiving the contamination. The damage has produced the inability to assess the damage. This is the most elegant and most disturbing aspect of the radiation theory. It is self-sealing. The poison produces the condition that prevents the recognition of the poison. The system is designed, not deliberately, not with intent, but through the specific logic of a situation where the agent of harm also controls the conditions of perception to perpetuate itself without generating the resistance that might interrupt it. Springfield cannot stop what is happening because Springfield cannot see it clearly enough to know that stopping it is necessary. Homer cannot stop what is happening to Homer for the same reason. The show has been depicting this for 36 years without stating it. It shows you the three-eyed fish and then shows you Springfield not connecting the three-eyed fish to anything else. It shows you Homer at the console and then shows you Homer not connecting his presence at the console to anything that the console is managing. It shows you the loop and then shows you the loop running, and the loop running, and the loop continuing to run without the interruption that seeing it clearly would produce. That is Springfield. That is Homer in Springfield. The most beloved fictional town in television history is a closed system of harm that cannot see itself clearly enough to stop, sustained by the specific cognitive and institutional damage that its primary industry has produced. And it will run this way for as long as the show runs, and probably in whatever imagined future time the show is projecting for its characters beyond the episodes we are given access to. The town is still there, Homer is still in it, the plant is still running, the water still carries whatever it carries. The loop runs. Number, supplemental. What the show has always known about Homer. The show has always known something about Homer that the casual viewer, watching episode by episode without the accumulated weight of the full run, does not necessarily perceive. It has known that Homer is the emotional center of the show, not because Homer is the most emotionally sophisticated character, he is not, but because Homer is the most emotionally present character. He is more there in any given moment than anyone else in the scene. Not more perceptive, not more capable of responding to emotional complexity with appropriate nuance, but more simply, completely there. This quality, which the show depicts through Homer's physical presence, his specific relationship with the immediate environment, his total absorption in whatever is happening right now without the mediation of what happened before or what might happen next, is the quality that makes him the center of the show's gravity. Not because centers of gravity need to be the most intelligent or the most capable or the most admirable force in their vicinity, but because they need to be the most present. The thing that everything else orbits. The mass that bends the space around it. Homer bends the space around him. The family orbits him not because he is the most competent or the most reliable or the most likely to produce the correct outcome in any given situation. They orbit him because he is entirely and consistently there in the specific, undivided way that his cognitive configuration makes possible. He is not managing multiple competing priorities. He is not planning forward while appearing to attend to the present. He is simply in the present, completely with whatever the present contains. This is the thing the show has always known and has always been depicting, not as a philosophical statement, not as an explicit argument, but as the organizing principle of its protagonist's characterization. Homer is present. Everything else follows from that. The show has also always known that Homer's love is the emotional fact that all the comedy is in service of. The comedy is the form. The love is the content. The disasters and the falls and the strangling and the 188 jobs and the donut and the vending machine and the crayon, these are the surface through which the love moves. The specific texture of the expression, the form that this particular love has taken given the specific person doing the loving and the specific life that person is living. Strip the comedy and what remains is not an empty shell. What remains is the love. The specific love of a specific man for a specific family in a specific town that does not appear on any map. The love that has been running since before the show started, that was running when Homer was 6 years old and Mona was there in the kitchen, that has been running through every episode and every reset and every disaster and every season that critics have classified as golden age or decline or revival. The love is not the show's message in the sense that the show is trying to communicate a message about love. The show is not a vehicle for a message. The love is just there, in the structure, as the thing that all the other things are organized around. The way a house is organized around the people who live in it, rather than the other way around. The people who live in the house on Evergreen Terrace are a man who reaches toward connection from the deepest place a person can reach from, and a woman who keeps choosing to be there to receive the reaching, and children who are growing up inside the specific warmth that this combination produces, in spite of everything, reliably, every episode without fail. The house is still there, the family is still in it, the show is still running, and Homer, wherever Homer actually is still reaching. That is the theory that explains everything else. Not the radiation, and not the coma, and not the Burns conspiracy, and not the floating timeline. Though all of those are true in their way, and all of them are worth understanding. The theory that explains everything else is the simplest one. Homer loves his family. He has always loved his family. He will love them for as long as the loop runs. And the loop will run for as long as there are people who need to go home to Evergreen Terrace. And there will always be people who need to go home to Evergreen Terrace, because Evergreen Terrace is where the family is, and the family, improbable and catastrophic and yellow-skinned and four-fingered and impossible and completely real, is what we came for. The loop is still running. Homer is still in it. Number supplemental. The episodes that almost said it. Moments where the show nearly broke the fourth wall. Across 36 seasons, The Simpsons has come close, on several occasions, to directly acknowledging the framework that the theories in this video describe. Not through the winking meta-references that later seasons use freely, the jokes about the show's own longevity, the characters commenting on the absurdity of their situation in ways that are funny precisely because they acknowledge the premise rather than engaging with it. Something more specific. Moments where the show seemed to be about to say something directly about what Springfield is, and what has been done to it, and what is wrong with the people who live inside it. The Blinky episode from Season 2 is the earliest and most explicit of these almost moments. The three-eyed fish is not a background joke. It is a plot point. It generates a gubernatorial campaign. It is used as evidence in a public argument about environmental damage. The show gives it every element of serious narrative treatment. Stakes, consequences, a character whose entire political trajectory turns on the question of what the fish means and what the power plant has done. And then Burns eats the fish on television and the town moves on. The movement on is the point. The show is not dropping the Blinky storyline because the writers ran out of interest in it. The show is depicting Springfield's specific relationship with evidence of its own contamination. The evidence is presented, the evidence is undeniable, the evidence is acknowledged by every participant in the narrative, and then the evidence is dismissed through a gesture so obvious in its inadequacy that it should not work and somehow does. Burns eating the fish does not disprove that the fish has three eyes. It does not explain why the fish has three eyes. It does not address any of the implications of a three-eyed fish in a river near a nuclear plant. It is simply an act of performative defiance, a powerful man's refusal to acknowledge what the evidence is saying, dressed up as a scientific demonstration. And it works. Springfield accepts it. The gubernatorial candidate who built his campaign on the fish loses. Life continues. The fish continues to have three eyes. The river continues to receive whatever the plant is putting into it. Everything resets. The show almost said it there. Almost made the connection explicit. It gave you every piece of the argument and then showed you Springfield refusing to assemble the pieces into the conclusion they pointed toward. The almost saying is more disturbing than the saying would have been because it shows you the mechanism, not ignorance, not the absence of information, but the specific active choice to look at the assembled evidence and decline to see what it shows. The Springfield Files episode from Season 8 is another almost moment, the one where the show comes closest to saying the radiation theory directly. Homer sees something in the woods. The town responds. FBI agents arrive. The investigation is conducted with the full apparatus of serious narrative engagement, and the reveal, when it comes, is that the glowing figure in the woods is Burns, his body emitting visible light as a byproduct of his weekly radiation treatments. The almost saying is right there in the reveal. The evidence is presented in the clearest possible form. A man who works at a nuclear plant, who manages that plant's radiation output, is himself so saturated with radiation that his body produces visible light. He literally glows in the dark. This is what proximity to unmanaged radiation does to a biological system. Springfield is looking directly at this evidence, in the form of its most powerful citizen, and its response is not to connect the glowing billionaire to the leaking plant, to the question of what the leaking plant has done to the people who are not billionaires and who do not have access to weekly treatments designed to manage their radiation exposure. The response is laughter, relief, and movement on. The show almost said it. It assembled the argument in the most vivid possible form, placed it directly in front of its characters, and then showed the characters choosing not to follow the argument to its conclusion. The almost saying is the saying, in the specific grammar of a show that communicates through what it depicts rather than through what it states. The Principal and the Pauper is the episode that comes closest of all. We have discussed this at length in the main body of the video, but its status as the show's most direct almost statement deserves specific acknowledgement in this context. That episode does not almost say that Springfield systematically suppresses inconvenient truths. It says it directly. The machinery of suppression is shown operating in real time. The vote is depicted. The legal decree is shown. The exile of the truth teller is shown. The show actually said it. And then the audience, which had been watching a comedy and was primed to receive the episode as a comedy, experienced it as a bad episode rather than as the show's most honest moment. The judgment that it was bad, which has persisted in the fan community and in critical discussions of the show for nearly 3 decades, is itself the most Springfield response imaginable to something that is uncomfortable and difficult and true. The episode was sent to the train, tied to the track, and expelled from the community of beloved episodes because it said something nobody wanted to hear in a way that didn't let the audience laugh it off. The last almost moment worth discussing is the ending of the show itself, which has not yet occurred, and which the show has never quite approached as a formal intention. But the fan community has been imagining it for decades, has been building theories about what the ending would look like if the ending came, and the theories cluster around a consistent image. Homer waking up from the coma, in the hospital, in the real Springfield, finding out how much time has passed. The show will not give this ending. The production realities do not support it, and the emotional realities do not support it either. An ending in which Homer wakes up from a decades-long coma and discovers that his children are adults and his wife has aged, and the world has moved past the specific version of it that he was preserving in the dream would be the most devastating finale in television history. Not devastating in the satisfying way that great finales are devastating, where the devastation is earned and cathartic and produces in the audience the specific feeling of having been through something that mattered. Devastating in the way that would not be cathartic at all, that would simply be loss. Homer waking up means the dream ending. The dream ending means Bart will never be 10 again. Lisa will never be 8 again. Maggie will not say her second word on this side of a childhood that has already happened while Homer was sleeping. Marge will not look the way she looked on the couch in 1993, and the couch will not be the couch. And 742 Evergreen Terrace will have continued into its own life without Homer in it, accumulating the kind of real-world history that dreams protect against. We do not want this ending. The audience does not want this ending. The audience wants the loop. The almost moments are as close as the show will come. The assembled evidence, presented without the full argument, the mechanism depicted without the name attached to it. The almost saying that is the grammar of a show that has been living in the gap between what it knows and what it can say for 36 years. Homer is still asleep, the dream is still running. The almost sayings are accumulating. The show knows what it knows. It just hasn't said it yet. Number supplemental. The secondary characters and what they reveal about Homer. The people who orbit Homer's life are not incidental to the Homer story. Each of them is, in some specific way, a mirror or a foil or a projection that reveals a dimension of Homer that the central family relationships alone cannot show. Barney Gumble is the most direct mirror, and the most uncomfortable one, because Barney represents the version of Homer's life in which the compensatory mechanisms failed. Barney is Homer without Marge. Not Homer without Marge in the dramatic sense of a Homer who lost Marge, but Homer who never had Marge, who did not have the specific presence of someone who chose him and kept choosing him to organize his life around. Without that organizing presence, without the daily evidence against the foundational lesson that the foundational lesson is wrong, Barney became the specific kind of person that the foundational lesson produces when it runs without counterweight. Barney is lovable in the specific way that people who have given up on themselves can still be lovable, because the giving up does not reach the affection they have for the people around them. He loves Homer. He loves his friends at Moe's. He is warm in his specific, diminished way, still capable of the reaching that his life has not given him the specific context to direct productively. He drinks instead. He has been drinking instead for the entire run of the show, with the brief and beautiful exception of the season 11 episode where he gets sober and discovers that the sobriety reveals a talent that the drinking has been covering. He goes back to the drinking, the same choice Homer made with the crayon, the same logic. The fog is where I function, and the alternative is something I cannot bear to maintain. Barney shows Homer what Homer would be without the specific structure that Marge and the children provide. Homer looks at Barney and does not consciously understand this. But the affection Homer has for Barney, which is warm and consistent and never condescending, suggests that somewhere below conscious awareness Homer recognizes in Barney the path that his own life might have taken, and that the recognition produces in him not superiority but gratitude and something close to grief. Lenny and Carl are the other version of this. They are Homer's life without the family but functioning. They have employment that is stable and social bonds that are genuine and daily lives that are not organized around the specific domestic structure of 742 Evergreen Terrace, and they are fine. Not in the diminished way that Barney is fine. Actually fine. They go to work. They go to Moe's. They have the specific life of men who found their equilibrium without the family structure, and who have built their equilibrium around each other and around the comfortable routines of their shared daily life. Homer, with Lenny and Carl, is the Homer who is most completely himself outside his family. Not the father, not the husband, not the employee, not the aspiration chaser, just Homer, with people who have known him long enough that the performance of any particular self is not required, who accept him as he is without requiring justification or management. The ease of their friendship is the ease of a very long acquaintance in which the initial awkwardness has been replaced by the specific comfort of people who know each other's rhythms. Moe is the most complex of Homer's regular social relationships, in the sense that it is the relationship where the surface, which is functional and affectionate and organized around the bar as a social institution, is most obviously covering something more complicated underneath. Moe cares about Homer. This is clear across the show's run in the specific way that care is clear when it is not performed but simply present in the texture of how one person relates to another. He worries about Homer in ways he would not cop to if asked. He is glad when Homer is glad. He is invested in Homer's life in a way that the bartender-customer framing does not fully account for. And Moe is desperately lonely. This is the most consistently and most carefully depicted element of his character. A man who is in the center of a social institution, whose daily life is organized around people coming through the door and staying and talking and staying, and who is nevertheless profoundly, constitutively alone. The loneliness is not the product of any single event or any single failing. It is the accumulated result of a life in which the specific forms of connection that Moe most needs have never quite arrived, in which the warmth that he extends to the people around him has not been returned in kind in the form that he most needs it returned. Homer is warm to Moe in ways that Moe needs, and that Homer provides without calibration or strategy, simply because Homer is warm and Moe is there, and Homer does not distinguish between the people who deserve his warmth and the people who don't, because Homer does not operate with that category of distinction. You are there, he will be warm to you. That is the entire system. For Moe, who has been in the presence of that warmth for decades without being able to fully receive it, because the warmth from Homer is not quite the form that Moe most needs, Homer is both the best thing in his social life and a daily demonstration of what he is missing. Homer's warmth is so complete and so genuine and so entirely not designed to give Moe specifically what Moe most needs that it simultaneously sustains Moe and underlines his isolation. This is a precise observation about the specific loneliness of people who are surrounded by genuine affection that is not quite the right shape. Homer loves Moe in Homer's way, which is real and warm and not nothing. But Homer's way is Homer's way, and Moe's need is Moe's need, and the gap between them is not the gap between a good person and a bad person, or a generous person and a stingy person. It is the gap between two people who are genuinely present to each other in forms that do not quite match. Homer does not know this. Homer experiences his friendship with Moe as mutual and complete because Homer does not notice the gap between his form of warmth and the form that is needed. He is too fully in the warmth to observe the gap. Moe knows the gap. Moe has known the gap for the show's entire run. He goes to Moe's anyway, every episode, and Homer comes through the door, and the warmth arrives, and it is not quite enough, and it is still the best thing about Moe's day. That is the friendship. It is the most honest friendship in the show, in the sense that its specific limitation is visible without either participant being able to name it, and it continues anyway, because the imperfect warmth is still warmth, and warmth, in Springfield, is not something anyone can afford to turn away. Number. Supplemental. The show's relationship with time. A final theory. The floating timeline has been discussed in terms of what it means for the characters, for the show's narrative architecture, for the coma theory's explanation of why nobody ages. But there is one more dimension of the floating timeline worth examining before we close, which is what it means for the audience's relationship with their own time. The Simpsons began in December 1989. If you were 10 years old when the show started, you are 46 now. If you were 20, you are 56. The specific people in your life who watched the show with you in 1989, on the couch of the specific house you grew up in, are now as old as they are, and the couch is wherever the couch has gone, and the house is whatever has become of the house. Bart was 10 in 1989. Bart is still 10 now. The gap between Bart's age and the age of anyone who was watching the show when it began has grown by 36 years and will keep growing for as long as the show runs, and the audience continues to age into whatever age they are becoming. This is the quiet mechanism of the show's emotional grip on the people who have been watching it the longest. The children of Springfield are frozen at the age they were when those viewers were children or teenagers or young adults. They are permanently the ages that are associated, in those viewers' memories, with the specific texture of the time when the show entered their lives. Watching the show now, for anyone who has been watching it since the beginning or since their own childhood or adolescence, is not simply watching a cartoon. It is a time machine that goes in one direction. Springfield stays the same. The viewer keeps aging. The gap accumulates. The gap becomes grief, not dramatic grief. The specific quiet grief of realizing that more time has passed than you were tracking. The grief of looking at something that has not changed and understanding, through the contrast of its permanence with your own change, that you have been going somewhere while the thing you were watching was standing still. Homer has been standing still for 36 years, the viewer has not. And the specific quality of the attachment that long-term viewers have to Homer, the quality that makes the theories possible and the continued viewing possible, and the cultural persistence of the show possible, is at least partly the grief of standing next to someone who is not aging, who is remaining the specific person they were when you met them, while you become older and different, and shaped by all the time that has passed. We watch Homer because Homer is still Homer, still on the couch, still reaching, still loving his family with the full weight of who he is, still failing in the specific ways he has always failed, and recovering in the specific ways he has always recovered. He is the fixed point. We are orbiting him. We keep orbiting him because fixed points, in a life that does not offer many of them, are worth orbiting. The loop runs because we need it to run. Homer is still in it. So are we. Number supplemental. Homer's relationship with his own name. There is a small and under-examined detail in the Homer mythology that sits at an intersection of multiple theories and that rewards close attention. Homer's name. Not the joke history of the name, not the fact that Matt Groening named Homer after his own father. The name within the fiction. The name as it functions in Homer's life. In Springfield. In the specific context of a show that has spent 36 years depicting a man whose own employer cannot remember what he is called. Homer is not a common name. It is not the kind of name that gets lost in a crowd of similar names, that blurs with its neighbors, that an otherwise functional memory might misplace because it is too close to too many other things. Burns does not fail to remember Homer's name because Homer is one of many Homers in his acquaintance. He fails to remember Homer's name because Homer, as an individual, does not register at the level of significance that name retention requires in Burns's cognitive economy. The name Homer carries, within the show's cultural universe, the weight of classical association. The Greek poet, the author of the Iliad and the Odyssey, the originating text of the Western literary tradition, in the specific account that Western literary tradition tells about itself. This is not an association the show makes explicit. It does not have Homer quote the Iliad or demonstrate knowledge of classical epic or draw any direct connection between himself and his classical namesake. The connection is there in the name and in the specific structure of Homer's life, which has the shape of an epic without the heroic register that the word epic implies. The Odyssey is the story of a man trying to get home. It is the story of a journey back to the specific place, the specific people, the specific configuration of life that constitutes home for this specific man, through every obstacle that can be constructed to prevent the return. The obstacles are real and they are fantastic, and they are the product of the specific combination of Odysseus's own character and the external forces arrayed against him. And he gets home in the end, not without loss, not unchanged, but home. Homer Simpson is trying to get home in every episode, not in the geographical sense of the journey, in the psychological sense of the project. Every episode is Homer navigating the specific obstacles that his life, his limitations, and the world around him place between him and the experience of being fully home, of being fully with his family in the specific way that constitutes home for him. He does not always get there. He often creates the obstacles himself, but the direction is consistent. He is always trying to get back to the couch, to the family, to the specific texture of the life that constitutes his Ithaca. Burns never remembers Homer's name. In the Odyssey, Odysseus is nomen to the Cyclops. His name is withheld to protect him, and the withholding gives him a specific kind of protection. In Springfield, Homer's name is withheld by Burns's indifference rather than by Homer's strategy, and the withholding does not protect Homer but rather marks his invisibility within the system that controls his daily life. He is nomen to Burns not as a disguise but as a condition. He does not exist at the level where names matter, within the structure that has organized his working life. And yet Homer persists. He shows up. He tries to remind Burns of his name, across decades of employment, with the specific quality of someone who genuinely believes that the next time might be the time it sticks, who has not given up on being recognized by the person who most systematically fails to recognize him. This persistence is not delusion. It is Homer's most fundamental quality applied to the most consistently unrewarding context available. The full reaching, the complete presence, the refusal to stop trying, directed at a man who will never quite see him. He keeps showing up anyway. The name is Homer. The show knows what the name means. The show has been telling you, in every episode, through the specific texture of what it depicts. This is an odyssey. This is a man trying to get home. Every obstacle and every disaster and every reset and every new job and every disaster in every new job is the journey. The couch at the end of it is Ithaca. He gets there every episode. He is always home by the credits. Not because the story requires a happy ending, but because the Odyssey has always been about the returning, not the traveling, and Homer's journey, however catastrophic in its execution, has always been toward home rather than away from it. Burns does not know his name. Homer knows where he lives. That is enough. It has always been enough. Number. Supplemental. The real mystery. Why we keep watching. The final mystery of the Homer Simpson theories is not really about Homer. It is about us, the audience. The people who have been watching this show since 1989, or since whenever they were old enough to understand it, or since last week when an algorithm delivered it to them, and they watched 4 episodes in a row without particularly intending to. Why do we keep watching? Not in the rhetorical sense that the question is sometimes asked, not as a way of noting the show's endurance as a cultural phenomenon. In the genuine sense, what are we finding, episode after episode, season after season, that keeps the viewing active and the investment alive? The theories in this video have circled this question without arriving at it directly, because the theories are about Homer and Springfield and Burns and the radiation and the coma and the loop. But all of those are answers to questions that are ultimately about the same thing. What is this show giving us that we need? The most honest answer is that Homer is giving us permission. Not permission for anything specific, not permission for bad behavior or low ambition or the specific forms of failure that Homer's life is organized around. Permission to be imperfect and still loved. Permission to fail at the execution of your own best intentions, repeatedly and without complete understanding of why the failure keeps occurring, and still be the person at the center of a life that matters. Permission to love people with everything you have, even when what you have is not always what they need, and the gap between what you have and what they need is real and will not close. Homer's life is full of this gap. The gap between his intentions and his executions, between his love and his ability to express the love in forms that the people he loves can always fully receive, between the man he wants to be and the man the crayon and the radiation and the childhood and the plant and Burns's indifference and the floating timeline have made him into. The gap is real. It has been real for 36 years. It will not close. And he is still, fully and completely and without reservation, the emotional center of a family that is intact and attached and fundamentally okay. Not because the gap closed, because the love on either side of the gap is genuine, and genuine love, the show has been arguing for 36 years, is sufficient. We watch because we live in the gap. We live in the distance between who we intend to be and who we manage to be, between what we want to give the people we love and what we actually give them, between the life we imagined and the life we have. We watch Homer because Homer lives in the gap too, more completely and more visibly and more comedically than most of us. And Homer's life, in spite of the gap or through the gap or because of the gap, is a real life. It matters. It is worth 36 years of documentation. If Homer's life matters, with its crayon and its contamination and its 188 failed jobs and its employer who does not know his name and its floating timeline and its coma dream, then the implication is available for anyone who needs it. Yours does too. That is the real mystery. That is what the show has always known and never quite said directly. The loop runs not because the writers cannot think of how to end it. The loop runs because what the loop contains is needed. By the audience, by the people who come back every week to check in on the family on the couch in the town that does not appear on any map, by the people who have been watching since 1989, and by the people who found it last month, and by the people who will find it after all of us are gone. Homer is still trying. The loop is still running. Come home. Number supplemental. A note on the couch gag. Every episode of The Simpsons begins the same way. The clouds part over Springfield. The town comes into view. The camera moves through it, past the familiar landmarks, the power plant cooling towers, the elementary school, the church, the nuclear facility that is the most recognizable silhouette on any fictional skyline in the history of television. The family arrives home from separate directions, converges in the living room, and sits on the couch together before whatever happens next begins. The couch gag changes every episode. The family's arrival is reimagined in hundreds of variations, through the full range of formal experimentation that animation allows, through tributes and parodies and conceptual premises that have nothing to do with the episode that follows. Some couch gags are 10 seconds. Some run longer than the show's standard opening sequence. All of them end the same way. The family is on the couch. The couch gag has been analyzed extensively as a formal device, as a production quirk, as a creative playground, as a running joke that accumulates its humor through the contrast of the elaborate variation with the fixed conclusion. All of these analyses are correct. The couch gag is all of those things. It is also the show's thesis statement, delivered at the beginning of every episode for 36 years. The world contains an infinity of variations. Every premise imaginable, every formal experiment, every reimagining of the path from the car to the living room. And at the end of every variation, the family is on the couch together, in the same room, on the same couch. The specific, improbable, contaminated, coma-dreamed, flood and disaster surviving, radiation absorbing, Burns adjacent, Floating timeline inhabiting family of Homer Simpson. The variations are the plot. The couch is the point. Homer is on the couch. He has been on the couch since the 17th of December, 1989. He will be on the couch for as long as the show runs. The couch does not change. The family on the couch does not change. The specific warmth of 5 people in a living room, whatever Springfield has done to them, and whatever is still being done, and whatever they have done to each other across decades of imperfect loving, does not change. That is what the couch gag has been saying every single episode. At the top, before anything else has happened, before any disaster has been initiated, or any job has been lost, or any treehouse of horror has arrived. It always comes back to the couch. Homer is there. He is always there. Go to sleep. Number supplemental. What Homer knows that he cannot say. There is a category of Homer Simpson knowledge that the show depicts with remarkable consistency, but almost never addresses directly. The things Homer understands without being able to articulate that he understands them. The emotional intelligence that operates in his behavior without being available to him as conscious awareness. The knowing that runs below the level of language, in the body, in the instincts, in the specific quality of his responses to situations that require not thought but presence. Homer knows that Bart is afraid of being like him. Not the surface comedy version of Bart's relationship with Homer's incompetence, not the easy joke of a son embarrassed by his father's public failures. The deeper version, Bart, who shares Homer's temperament and Homer's instincts and Homer's specific combination of warmth and catastrophic execution, is aware on some level that the path his personality is on leads somewhere specific, and that the somewhere specific looks a lot like the couch in Sector 7G. He is running from this awareness through the pranks and the rebellions and the specific energy of a child who is using external chaos to stay ahead of internal understanding. Homer knows this. Not analytically. He knows it the way he knows most things that matter. In the body, in the specific quality of his response to Bart that is different from his response to anyone else, warmer and more patient and more willing to absorb damage than his response to people who are not carrying the specific freight that Bart is carrying. He absorbs Bart's chaos with the specific patience of someone who recognizes the chaos as his own, reflected back at him from a younger vantage point, and who knows that patience is the only useful response. He cannot explain why he is patient with Bart in ways he is not patient with other people. He does not have the introspective access or the cognitive architecture for that explanation. He is just patient, in the specific way, for the specific reasons that the body knows even when the mind cannot name them. Homer knows that Lisa will leave. He has always known this, in the same wordless and inaccessible way that he knows things about his children that he cannot articulate. Lisa will grow up, and growing up will take her somewhere beyond Springfield, beyond the household, beyond the orbit of the family, into a life that her intelligence and her ambitions and her specific quality of reaching toward a world that is larger than the one she grew up in will require. He knows this. He cannot face it. He does not try to face it. What he does instead is hold on to the present version of Lisa with a completeness that is part love and part grief, that is both the full presence he always brings and something additional, a specific quality of attention that is organized around cherishing what is here because he knows, somewhere below the language, that it is temporary. The saxophone, the way she sits when she is reading, the specific expression on her face when she is thinking about something that interests her fully, the expression that is so completely her and no one else. He is memorizing these things without knowing that he is memorizing them, storing them in the place where the body stores the things that the mind cannot be trusted with, against the day when she is gone and the memory is all he has. Homer knows that Marge carries more than she shows. He knows it the way long intimacy produces its own form of knowing, the specific attunement of two people who have lived in close daily proximity for long enough that the other person's interior states are accessible through means that could not be articulated but are real. He knows when Marge is maintaining the surface of competence and patience over something that is harder than the surface shows. He does not always respond to this knowing in ways that help, because the knowing and the appropriate response are mediated by the cognitive gap that the crayon created, and the gap catches some things that the knowing produced. But the knowing is there. He feels the weight she is carrying. He cannot always name it or address it, or produce the specific response it calls for. He reaches toward her with what he has, which is his presence and his warmth, and the specific quality of physical closeness that does not need words, and that sometimes, Enough of the time is what she needed. He knows that Springfield is strange, not analytically, not with the critical distance that would allow him to identify what is strange and why, and what is causing the strangeness. But he knows it the way a person knows their own body's version of strange. The way you know that something is off without being able to locate exactly what it is or what it means. The town feels like a town that is doing something it should not be doing. This knowledge surfaces occasionally in Homer's behavior, in the specific moments when he looks at something in Springfield that should be alarming, and has an expression that is almost the expression of alarm, almost the face of someone who is about to ask the obvious question. Before the moment passes and the food arrives, or the television comes on, or the crayon reestablishes its management of the specific neural pathway that the almost knowing was traveling. He almost knows. He has been almost knowing for 36 years. He is on the couch. The knowing is still there. Below the surface, below the crayon's management, below the fog. It has always been there. It will always be there. The part of Homer that was there before the damage arrived, the part that Mona loved before she had to leave, the part that is still reaching for the truth, even through the specific architecture of limitation that the truth has to travel through to get to him. Homer is almost knowing. He is almost there. The loop runs. He is on the couch. Marge is in the kitchen. The children are in their rooms. Springfield is outside, doing what Springfield does. In the dark, in the silence between episodes, in the specific ongoing present tense of a floating timeline that never quite lands. Almost knowing. Still reaching. Still home. Wherever you are right now, whatever time it is, the couch is still on Evergreen Terrace. The family is still on it. Homer is still there, reaching, in the only way he knows how. Good night.